Hello, and welcome. I am Chilling Tales. And as you get ready for bed, you must know that you are doing amazing and you deserve all the sleep you can get. So as you are winding down, let me know where you are from and what time you are watching this video. Like and subscribe to help the channel if you'd like. Now put your mind at ease and let the story unfold. There's a church on the hill with a saint who watches the town sleep. People say she's older than the church and younger than the hill. The hill came with the land, the church came with a donation, and the saint came with a story. They set her in a niche above the side door decades ago. Plaster over wood, paint tempered by a steady hand, a robe the blue of laundry sitting in a basin, a mouth small and determined, and the first thing she did was look like someone you knew. Her glass eyes had a film over them when I was a kid, which made adults talk lower in her shadow. At dusk, she seemed to see more of you. At midnight, if you went close, and everyone does once, you could make out what was trapped under the gloss. Tiny irregularities, bubbles like seeds, the old way of making eyes fixed on a single forever gaze. My grandmother kept a key to the sacristy and sometimes brought me along to fill candles on Friday afternoons. It smelled of cold stone, and wax behaved better there. I loved the small hush behind the side door that felt like an apology for the big hush in the knife. One late winter day, the kind of afternoon that looks like it wants to be snow and can't quite, my grandmother kept the door propped while she hauled a box in, and in the exact moment the door was neither open nor shut, I watched the saint blink. Just once, a small correction, like dust had landed and the eye had taken care of it. "Gran," I said. "Hmm?" She was counting votives the way saints count promises, seat of the pants and exact. She blinked. "She does, sometimes," my grandmother said, and when I stared, she added gently, "You'll learn not to check on purpose." I tried not to. It's hard for a child not to. Years later, after my grandmother, after time had made the niche need repainting, after the church's roof had forgotten its job and then relearned it, after I had moved away and come back and moved away again and then came back for good, because towns do that to you. The saint's eyes were clearer. The glass had been cleaned by a restorer the parish had splurged for. The bubble glass was gone. New eyes, the kind that shine. It was only practical, Father Marco said when people complained that the new eyes made them nervous. Condensation gets behind the glaze. Mold. You want the Blessed Virgin with mold in her skull? She's not the Virgin, Mrs. Ansell said. She's Saint Dymphna, or Dorothea, or someone from the list we don't read. She knows our business. She doesn't need shine. Shine or not, she kept watch. The town had more cameras than saints now, but the saints saw the right things. She missed the loud fights and caught the quiet ones. She missed the tourist's photo and caught the 3 seconds after, when the tourist turned his phone away and looked at the hill like the hill had said his name. She missed the day we raised money for a new roof and caught the night a woman came to sit on the steps with a bag she did not open for a long time. I started sitting with the saint myself the year my father forgot how doors work. I'd walk him after supper because appetite gets tired before legs do. When your mind misfiles your maps, we'd circle the block, go by the church, nod to the side door, check that the heavy key in my pocket existed, and say neutral things about weather and the dog 2 streets over that barks like a trumpet. He didn't like the knife. The big air made him look for exits he couldn't name. But he liked the side door. The saint was at face level if you stood on the last step. "She's your height," he said once, and I, who had never liked being told I was short, found that I didn't mind from him, because the way he said it meant close enough to hear you. On a Wednesday that had nothing specific wrong with it, he pulled his hand from mine and reached toward her the way a man reaches to check if the iron is still hot. The saint didn't blink. That would have been too much like another kind of story. She did something smaller. She turned her head a fraction. The glass caught dusk, then didn't. Careful? I said, but I wasn't talking to him. I just wanted to see what color, he said, hungry for words that day. Are they brown or green? Blue? I said, and then realized I was wrong. No, they're the kind that change. He looked up at her the way a child looks at a shelf and decides to climb. She knows, he said, satisfied, and I wished not for the first time that religion were as simple as the sentences we put in our own mouths. That night I woke at 3:12 and heard, no, felt the shift in the house that says a parent's feet have found an inappropriate route. I checked his room, empty. The front door hadn't been locked because he hated the idea of locked anything. I found him on the church steps with his coat misbuttoned and his breath in the air like a small, honest cloud. The saint's eyes shone. The town lay below, lights like coins thrown into a fountain too full. What did she say? I asked, hushing myself, because asking is good and answering breaks something. She asked if I remembered the tune, he said, then laughed, then touched his head, then said, "It's a walk, isn't it?" It is. We walked home very slowly, so the tune would not get ahead of us. After he died, the saint was easier to look at. Grief can make you love statues, because they don't change except when they do. I brought candles to the side door and lit one in the little rack where the safe licks at quarters. I said, "For my father," in a voice that did not ask for a miracle. A miracle is a shortcut, and a house like ours needed a road. She looked past me. Of course she did. Saints look at the thing you didn't bring. I began to see other people standing on the steps with the same hungry look. A woman with a split lip, careful, fresh, holding a phone like it might bite. A man who wore a jacket that said another town and eyes that said this one. A kid with a backpack too light for homework, too heavy for running away. People came and told the saint their secrets without saying anything. That's the correct way to do it. When the rumor went around that the saint had been seen weeping at the side door, proper miracle whispered at markets. I shook my head. We are greedy for tears. The story arrived with details, witnesses, tissues waved like surrender flags, and still I said no. If she wept, it would not be public. It would not make anyone's faith bigger than their town. Still, I began to carry a handkerchief folded in my coat pocket, the good linen one, because my grandmother would have done it that way, and if the saint needed a plain square of clean white to choose, I could pretend that was something I could offer. One evening after the early mass, when the light in the nave remembers how to be gold, Father Marco asked if I could help carry boxes to the sacristy. He is older now, ladders, and he don't rhyme. We stood in that small hush where wax behaves and unwrapped a new set of beeswax pillars the bishop had sent because he felt guilt about something distant and expensive. Do you think she blinks? Father asked, not looking at me. I know she does, I said. I saw her as a child, and once again when my father was halfway out of the world. He nodded. She's not Dymphna, he said, apropos of nothing except his own wrestling. The diocesan archivist found the original note from the donor. It says St. Lucia. Eyes, I said, feeling slow and chastened. Of course, she carries them on a plate, if you remember your gory holy cards, he said wryly. She leaves the better ones where they're needed. We stood a moment. Do you think that's why she watches the town? I asked. To take and give? Everyone's always taking and giving with saints, he said, kind and tired. Perhaps she just watches so that someone is watching. There was a sound from the side door. Not the hinges, the quiet shifting of someone who has made a decision at last. Father and I glanced at each other and did not move, because the right kindness is to let some decisions be witnessed without help. Footsteps came and went. The door breathed and settled. The saint kept her eyes on the hill. It was the handkerchief that did it, in the end. A week later, wind sharp enough to strip paint from breath, I found a scrap of white cloth folded precisely on the bottom step, not damp though the stone was wet around it. My hand knew it before my head did, not mine. The linen was older and finer. The stitches on the edges were hands' work, not machines. In the center, the cloth bulged a little, as if it held a coin. I unfolded it, stupid, reverent. A small glass bead rolled into my palm, rounder than the saint's eyes, mottled with tiny bubbles like seeds in jam. I looked up. She watched. It isn't an eye, I told myself aloud, because language keeps doors between things. It wasn't, not anatomically, but I knew what it meant when it was mine for a moment. Someone had come in the night with a need, and the saint had made a trade in symbols. Here is vision, leave me your fear. Here is clarity, leave me your lie. Here is the ability to look and not forget. Leave me the part of you that wants to. I wrapped the bead back in the linen and tucked it into the niche below her hands, where small offerings rest. The note folded like an airplane, the ring left like a relief, the dried bouquet that sticks around out of loyalty. Find who it's for, I said, ridiculous, and walked home with my hands in my pockets so I wouldn't touch my eyes by accident. News ran through town, not as gossip, but as startled gratitude. A girl who had fallen had the courage to say she had. A man who had been caught in his lie told it himself and then told it again until it felt like a story he was done with. A neighbor who'd gone quiet after the hospital returned with jokes only one person laughed at, and that was enough. No one said the saint did it. The saint keeps watch. People do things. One night late, I woke to the feeling that someone was standing at the bottom of my bed. It was the old fear. I am not immune. I lay there and named furniture until the feeling passed. In the morning, on my kitchen table, lay my grandmother's handkerchief, the one I carry, not the saint's, folded precisely, a small bulge at its center. No, I said to the air, smiling and not. I don't need to see more. I need to look longer. I unfolded it anyway. In the center lay nothing. The bulge was made by a fold I had not unmade in years. The cloth smelled faintly of stone. At dusk, I took my empty handkerchief to the side door and tucked it into the niche. The saint's eyes shone the way clear glass shines. She looked at the hill. The town breathed. The bell's electric now, a recorded chime, told the hour once and no one minded. If you come by the church, ours or yours, don't look for tears. Look for the small corrections, the blink that knocks dust off a gaze, the fraction of a head turn that says, I see the thing you didn't bring. Bring a clean square of cloth anyway. Bring a promise to look longer and not louder. Bring a secret and the ability to keep it until keeping hurts. Saints are doors we set in walls because we forget how to open sky. Sometimes they hand us a key that isn't a key, and we pretend to understand because pretending keeps our feet where the stone is good. If she looks at you, don't ask for anything first. Say what my father said, happy as a child. It's a walk, isn't it? And then take one around the block and around again until the hill and the town and the glass-eyed saint all agree that tonight at least you have been seen. Now, on to the next story. The first time I heard the station call a stop that doesn't exist, I thought I was mishearing my own voice. The graveyard shift in central control isn't glamorous. It's a room that smells like warm plastic and old coffee, half lit so the wall of monitors wears the city like a dim aquarium. I sit under a map that pulses with tiny lights, trains as fireflies, power blocks as bones. Between midnight and 5, it's mostly ballast, a few last runs rattling home, a lot of empty track, and in between the city's heartbeat, learning to keep quiet. Next stop, Marrow Street. Doors open on the left. I had just finished the 0210 slate of automated announcements. Delay on the blue, elevator out at East Market. Mind the gap if you still believe in poetry. My finger hovered over the console touchpad, the way it does when you're done with a thing, but not ready to admit it. The speakers that run our internal feed murmured with the uninteresting sounds of a station at night. Hum, draft, a distant cough. Then that, my voice saying a name I've never recorded, for a stop our map has never carried. I pulled up the list of all scheduled stations, as if software could argue with what my ears had just taken in. The list is tidy. We have the stations we have. The ghosts live in the hallways, not in the database. A camera at platform 2 of Kingfisher flickered. The platform was empty, except for a man whose jacket made him look like a plastic bag caught on a fence. He turned toward the lens with the recognition of people who know cameras better than faces. The glass behind him showed his reflection, then something else, then only the tiled black. Next stop, Marrow Street, my voice said again, softer, as if a door had been closed between us. I unmuted the ops line. The dispatcher on duty yawned so hard we both felt it. "You hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" The room's vents answered, because vents always choose the wrong time to grow opinionated. I listened for my phantom again and got only the live feed from a blue line car, a lone pair of shoes on gray vinyl, 2 ad posters pretending to be cheerful, the driver's cab door shut and properly latched. "It's nothing," I said, and the dispatcher grunted in the language of people who love nothing. Later, at 3, a maintenance crew keyed up on the radio to say they were clear of the track by the old river tunnel. Someone made a joke about eels, someone else about urban legends. Laughter sounded like wrenches politely clinking. I signed them out of the block and watched the little rectangle on my map change color. Safe again. I noted the time in my log and the steady handwriting I learned after. I practiced being tidy because it gave me a way to survive what I couldn't control. At 3:17, a train icon butted at the edge of the map in a place no train should ever bud. We're not an old city, not in the European sense, but we've dug enough holes to pretend. There are tunnels we don't use. Some got flooded, some got walled off when the new line's curve didn't agree with the old. There are rooms under stations that appear on the original schematics as storage, and whose keys we don't carry anymore. There are tracks laid for promises that budgets never kept. The map in my head is 2 maps overlaid, the official one, with its colors and stops that council members can pronounce into ribbons, and the other, the one I started collecting the year my son disappeared, and no camera could say which door took him. The arriving icon bore a designator the system should never display, K0. We have no K line. "Dispatch," I said evenly. "What do you have near the old river tunnel?" "Nothing," he said, brisk now, awake in the way men get when something violates their idea of the world. "Why?" "Glitch," I said. I dragged the cursor over the icon, and it offered me a speed, 11 miles per hour, a length, 6 cars. Power draw, wrong. It was pulling from a string of blocks we no longer fed. The system offered a route as if its feelings mattered. The route ran past 3 stations we don't staff anymore because no one lives on the river flats now, not since the 3rd flood. Past that, it made a sharp left where left is wall, and climbed toward the interlocking that separates green from orange. It did not slow. It flowed like water in a basement. "Do you want me to call the cops?" Dispatch asked, and I imagined uniformed officers in a room that smells like our room, staring at a bank of screens and practicing disbelief. "Negative," I said. "Probably a logging error." I zoomed. The icon held steady, like an animal refusing to be shooed. "Technicians can look in the morning. Next stop, Hickory Gate," my voice said on the internal feed, calm as a priest. "Doors open on the right." "We have no Hickory Gate." I switched to the driver to control line. No one called in. The rolling stock cameras showed the same thing over and over, a long night to nowhere. On camera 2, a woman slept with her mouth slightly open, clutching a paper bag that had the shape of dinner. On camera 4, someone had scratched a set of initials into the wall by the second seat from the door, the way teenagers do when they believe in future archaeologists. On camera 6, an ad for a mattress clung stubbornly to a frame that had been meant to hold real plastic, not 3 layers of overlapping tape. Call the interlocking, dispatch said. Tell them to go eyes on when the whatever it is reaches it. Copy, I said. Then, because there are chores that keep terror from finding your throat, I wrote a maintenance ticket for a flickering light at beach. I set the ventilation at Haviland to circulate once an hour, because sometimes the air is the problem people can't name. I ticked time forward a minute with my fingertip and watched the K0 get nearer to a place we control. In the corner of the room, under the map and its polite pulsing, sits a shelf of things lost. Not the big lost and found, that's at Central Station, open weekdays 10 to 4, guarded by a woman named Nisha, who remembers children by what they loved enough to misplace. This is the other lost, the things night people scoop from platforms and stairwells between trains, because sometimes objects scare the daylight crew, and sometimes the daylight crew scares the objects. A cracked pair of glasses, a scarf that smells like wet wool even when it's dry, a child's shoe with a Velcro strap that never quite learned to stick, a plastic ring, a toy phone. I pick things up. That's how my right hand stays busy when the left is counting minutes. The toy phone weighs almost nothing. It's meant for a toddler. Big buttons with pictures instead of numbers. A tiny speaker that chirps when you press the star. A face sticker rubbed half off. It has no battery compartment. It has never had one. Press the star and it chirps anyway. When the K0 reached the interlocking, the camera there showed what I expected and hated, nothing. Track, the red eyes of signal aspect as if it were holding its breath for an express that never runs at this hour. The wall beyond, stained in a certain way because water, like rumor, finds the same paths over and over. I toggled the light control for the next station in line. The station lights came up like a nervous laugh. The internal feed said, in my voice, next stop, Ashdown. Doors open on the left. Ashdown is on the map, but no train had asked permission to enter it. I pulled up the power monitor and watched the draw dip and surge like a heartbeat that doesn't understand itself. Interlocking control, a new voice crackled into my ear. This is not funny. Agreed, I said. Do you have any eyes inbound? A camera, she said. And Vic, who doesn't get paid enough to believe in ghosts. Dead air. Then, more softly, it's on the board but not on the rails. Can you put it in my hands? I knew what she meant. Sometimes the software uses old expectations to keep itself from crashing. Sometimes you can shepherd it better if you give it a place to land. I can clear the block if no movement detected. That's not what I asked, she said. I know, I said. Next stop, Marrow Street. My voice said, too calm to be true. Doors open on the left. I have a son. Had. Have. The grammar depends on the hour. He was 4 when he loved trains the way other boys love fire trucks. He pressed his palms to the windows at Central and named colors like spells. He would not sit on my lap if the bench had gum underneath, because he liked beginnings more than middles. On a Tuesday in March, the kind with rain that has forgotten what temperature is, he and his mother rode into the museum and back. On the way back, between stops, a door light tripped, and the driver held at a station not on their route. The records say that. The driver opened, closed, no incident. The cameras show nothing but a small boy's handprint, where glass is colder than air. When the train rolled into our station after, he wasn't on it anymore. We had his name on the news for 3 weeks. People messaged me with sympathy after it became clear that your name makes good paper for a month and bad paper for the rest of your life. My ex-wife moved to a city with fewer tunnels. I stayed here and learned how the map hums when it's trying to solve a problem it can't admit exists. Where would you like to receive it, I asked. The center pocket, interlocking control said, behind the school construction. If it exists, it'll hate that. Copy, I said, and told the map the lie it wanted. This is a train. I am clearing its way. The K0 took the path politely, like a man who tips badly but holds a door. Next stop, Hickory Gate, my voice said again. It made my teeth hurt. Doors open on the right. Dispatch breathed in my ear. You're not? No. I said I'm not. Then who? I don't know, I said, and let the unknown sit between us like a sleeping dog you refuse to step over. We're receiving 202. 202 shows your train clocking into a block. It didn't. The software does this when it can't tell you something directly, because it would break its own rules to do it. It flags, instead, the fact that time did not pass the way it thinks it should, which is the bravest thing a machine can do. Do you want me to kill power? Dispatch asked, and I imagined the city above me sighing as the neon goes thin. Hold, I said. If this was a malfunction, power cycling might bury it. If it wasn't, power cycling might invite it closer. There is a tone to these things, a little respect you learn to give stories that outlive the men who made them. On the Ashdown platform, the camera caught a blur at the far stair, a woman's coat maybe, the edge of a face, a bare knee, pale as a truth. She stopped when the station lights came up, turned as if she had been caught in her own kitchen at night. She held something small, the way a person carries a sandwich, or a kitten, or a phone. She was older than the last time I saw her. She is older than me now, in the pictures on the mantel. I closed my eyes and opened them again, because you are allowed that much magic in a room with a map. Next stop, Marrow Street. Doors open on the left. The K0 icon reached the pocket we had offered it. It paused. The camera showed only the pocket track's oil slick shine, as if someone had set a mirror face down. A breath caught in my throat in a way that did not respect my job. In the glass in front of me, the toy phone on the shelf lit, a star on plastic white, a glow with no battery to blame. I pressed it without meaning to. The chirp it made is for toddlers, a sound that exists in a world before uncertainty. The intercom fizzed, not the internal feed. The system-wide, the voice you use when you need to tell the whole city something at once and expect it to obey. I had not keyed it. Doors opening, said my voice. On the Ashdown camera, every door on a train that wasn't there folded back. Passengers don't fall for magic the way movies tell you they do. They hedge. They test with a toe, a breath, a turned shoulder. A kid with a skateboard touched the air where a door would be if there were a train. A woman pulled her purse closer to her chest, turned away, and then turned back, as if fear's hand on her shoulder had become rude. Someone laughed. Someone else said God without meaning anything ecclesiastical by it. On camera 3 in the Blue Line train, I had been watching earlier. The sleeping woman stirred. She lifted her head, blinked, cursed a soft local curse. The ad for the mattress promised less insomnia if you settled your debt to foam. The child's faces on the ad looked like they were asleep, so they could sell to mothers. Doors closing, my voice said, kind as surgery. On the Ashdown platform, a small boy, 4, 5, ran between his mother's knees, the way my son used to when he wanted to turn a no into a yes, trusting entirely the hallway a body can make. He ran into the light and did not hit anything and vanished in the specific way you want to believe. No child can. His mother screamed, not a movie scream, the sound a person makes when the train leaves, with the part of you it never had permission to take. I stood. The chair rolled backward and banged the shelf. The toy phone slid and fell and didn't hit the ground. It hung in the air for an extra full second, like it was waiting for a hand to catch it from the other side. Then it dropped, light as a candy wrapper. Kill power, I said, and dispatch swore. Power cycling a system in motion takes a checklist longer than the time you spend on it. He threw 3 breakers anyway. The hum in the room changed pitch like a hive that just remembered it was bees. Lights on 2 stations hiccuped and came back sulky. My board went dark, then warm. On the Ashdown camera, the woman fell to her knees and slapped her palms on nothing and left warmth on air the way candles leave on photographs. "You can't do that," the interlocking op said in the cool tone of someone who can't afford to cry. "You can't take the whole city out on a hunch." "It's not a hunch," I said, and the toy phone in my hand pressed the star by itself and chirped like a heart monitor. The K0 icon vanished. The software offered a balloon of text. Ghost train cleared, then swallowed it politely, as if to apologize for its joke. The monitors returned to their aquarium, empty tracks, the occasional janitor, a rat practicing stairs. Dispatch muttered about reports and reprimands, and he would cover for me, and please don't ever ask him to do that again. In the Ashdown feed, the woman's hands lifted from the perfect air and left 2 ghostly prints fading on nothing. She turned her head toward the camera. Her mouth shaped a name I know very well. The morning managers arrived at 6, smelling of clean shirts and the kind of sleep you earn by not knowing what night is like. I filled out 3 incident reports with words that made sense, then signed them with a hand that had not had a place to rest in hours. Someone brought donuts. Someone charted the power dip against a maintenance window and shrugged. The city above us stretched, checked its phone, and pretended to have dreamed nothing. At 9, after the commute, the woman from Ashdown came into central control. Not many people even know where we are. They pass under our rooms every day and never think about who pushes the announcements and turns the air and sends steel where steel must go. She had a face I had seen younger. She had been the kind of pretty that doesn't realize it, and now was simply true, in the way a person gets when she has buried enough people to stop asking why. She carried a paper bag that had once held a sandwich, or a kitten, or a phone. She didn't look at me. She set the bag on the counter and said to no one. He was holding my hand. Then she left, and the smell of wet wool followed her out. Inside the bag lay a child's shoe with a Velcro strap that would never quite learn to stick. The city is generous with its stories if you stay late. Over the next weeks, more voices came through the internal feed when they weren't supposed to, calling stops that don't exist in my tidy database. Hickory Gate again, a station called Unthank, a place called South March, that old maps list as a marsh. K0 rolled its impossible route 3 more times, always after 3, never at the top of the hour. We learned its habits and it learned ours. When it called doors, it wasn't only for the lost. Sometimes it took fear, sometimes it gave it back. Once a man put his palms to the space where a car should be and stepped backward as if something had nudged his knees. Once a dog bristled and then lay down, obedient to a whistle we couldn't hear. I do the brave thing now when it comes. I don't fight it with breakers, not unless someone is about to give the night what it cannot return. I open the right yards so it will hate them and pass. I light the wrong platforms so it will miss. I speak into my own microphone and fill the city with useless inventory, a clock that's 3 minutes slow, the names of bridges that don't exist anymore, smells the fans can't explain, so there is less room for the other voice to coil itself into the day. I never say my son's name out loud, not in the headphones, not in this room where the map loves names. Sometimes the toy phone lights by itself, and I put my palm over it, like you do a candle, you mean to smother kindly. It warms my skin and pretends not to. Next stop, Marrow Street, my voice says on nights when I have not recorded anything, and somewhere under the river where the concrete sweats and paint remembers flood, a 6-car nothing rides along a track we didn't lay, carrying everyone its ode. The city will tell you there is no K-line. The city is technically correct. The K-line is a habit the tunnels picked up from us, the way we want everything to be aligned with stops and starts. But habits are real. They make roots with or without your permission. The night has its own signage. The walls have their own way of reading maps. If you hear my voice call a station you can't find, don't follow it. If something like a door opens where no train waits, take a step back and find a human hand to hold. If you have a child with fingers like stars, put their palms on windows you trust and teach them to say the names of colors like spells, but keep a hand on their shoulder when the train says there's a shortcut. And if you have lost something that answers when the internal feed says a stop you've never ridden to, do not come to the platform alone. Bring someone who believes in inventory. Bring a person who can list what's in their pockets without looking. Keys, receipt, a coin from a country they have never seen. Bring something small that makes a noise that doesn't need a battery. Hold it in your hand. When the impossible doors open and the air exhales like a tunnel, remembering wind, press that star and make a toddler's chirp. Sometimes the night will blink, annoyed, like a driver caught at yellow who chooses red. Sometimes the doors will close on nothing, and the K0 will carry on, stubborn as a rumor. And sometimes, rarely, you will hear a small familiar laugh, like tape left on a radiator, and you will be forgiven for the way your knees go out. On my shelf under the polite pulsing map sits a paper bag and a shoe with a Velcro strap. Next to it, the toy phone, its face sticker half rubbed away by someone's thumb. When the lights in the room choose to go thin and the tunnels gather their own breath, I put my hand on the phone and feel the heat that plastic can hold if you let it, and I say into the mic, for everyone and no one, doors closing. The room waits. The city holds its map like a promise it's not sure it can keep. And somewhere below, in the pocket behind the construction that made us safe, steel rolls where steel shouldn't, and a small voice I know counts stops I've never learned, certain that if he gets to the right one I'll be there, standing in a light that doesn't exist, offering my hand through air that remembers both of us. Now, on to the next story. The first time the shadow crossed the ridge, the bells in the church tower rang by themselves. They didn't clang in panic. They rang politely, as if announcing a visitor. That's how the old people in our village talk about it, like a guest you set a plate for, even though you know he won't eat. Nobody remembers when the shadow began, only that it's older than the road and younger than the river. It is seasonal and not. It comes with storms and also in clear weather. It stains roofs and faces. It chooses a house each time, rests on it until the walls learn to listen, and then moves on. The year it chose ours, my mother boiled basil and hung sprigs over the door. My father chalked a circle around the lintel and said a prayer in a language he only used when he spoke to sleep. I sat on the steps with my chin in my palms and watched the ridge, waiting for the light to do the wrong thing. It did. The shadow didn't fall from a cloud. It rose from the tree line, as if the mountain were exhaling night in the middle of the day. It slid over fields and fences and chicken wire without touching any of them, and settled on our roof with such gentleness. You could almost love it for how carefully it handled what it intended to ruin. Inside, the rooms went quiet, not the good quiet, the kind that makes plates heavy. You'll go to Aunt Marla, my mother told me, tying a scarf under my chin, even though I wasn't cold. You'll sleep there until it passes. I want to stay, I said, because stubbornness felt like love, and I had not yet learned the difference. My father looked at the ceiling as if sound might drip through it. You can stay tonight, he said finally, if you promise not to answer. Answer what? You'll know, he said. We ate early. The soup tasted like boiled nerves. In the corner, the old radio we never used anymore clicked on, hummed without finding a station, and clicked off again. The ceiling cracked in a new direction. Outside, our neighbor's dog lay down and placed its muzzle on its paws, as if it had been scolded by God. At dusk, the shadow thickened. It doesn't grow darker the way evening does. It grows denser, as if it's collecting itself for a thought. When full night came, the house stopped pretending to be anything but a mouth. We bedded in the front room. My mother slept with her shoes on. My father leaned against the wall with his eyes open, as if blinking were an invitation. I lay on the couch and counted the boards in the floor. It was easy math until it wasn't. Some boards doubled and others vanished, and I accepted it because one night is a long time to argue with wood. At some hour that will never belong to a clock, a knock came at the door. Not the door to the street, the door to the attic. We don't have a door to the attic. We have a pull string and a hatch that groans when you ask it to remember you. But that night, a door stood beneath the hatch, painted the exact color of our hallway, trimmed to match our house, fitted with a knob that reflected nothing at all. 3 polite knocks. My father shook his head at me before my muscles could decide to move. "Don't answer," he mouthed. My mother crossed herself with a 4th finger I had never seen. The knocking came again, the polite rhythm that says neighbor, not stranger, that says help me move a chair, borrow a cup of sugar, tell me a story, let me in. "I hear you," a voice said, muffled by wood and distance. "I know you're awake." It wasn't a beggar's voice. It was the voice you use when you've arrived precisely on time to a place that owes you something. "Who is it?" I asked without saying the words. My father's face told me he heard them anyway. "Don't answer," he said aloud, very softly, perhaps to the room, perhaps to the shadow, perhaps to whatever kept track of debts. We breathed together. The house breathed with us. The door to the attic waited the way a lake waits for movement. "I remember you," the voice said, and the trouble with memory is that it makes liars out of gods and men. We were nobody to be remembered. We were a family with a leaking roof and a fence that leaned, but the voice said it the way a teacher says a name at roll call, as if attendance mattered. My father stood. The chalk circle around the lintel wasn't meant for attics, but he placed his palm there anyway, like a man checking his own temperature. "This house is full," he said. "Try the next." The voice made a sound like paper turning. "This house is owed," it said. "It has been owed since before your walls learned how to stand, since before your door decided which way it wanted to open." My mother reached into the stove with bare hands and drew out a coal that didn't hurt her. She placed it in the iron dish we use for salt on feast days. Its light was small and stubborn. It made the corners of the room sit up a little straighter. "You can pass," she told the voice. "You have our permission to cross the courtyard and leave our roof." "The shadow doesn't ask permission," the voice said, and it would have sounded arrogant if it hadn't been so terribly true. The knob turned, not quickly, as if whoever stood on the other side were learning the shape of our handle. The door didn't open. The door learned patience. From the street came the sound of someone walking, one person, then 2, then more, a procession of feet that didn't hurry and didn't drag. Shadows slid under the crack beneath the attic door, long and thin and jointed wrong. They hesitated at the edge of the rug, as if the loom had laid a spell when it lifted its last weft. "Don't answer," my father repeated, closing his eyes as if that could close other things. "It will leave at dawn if you don't answer." "What if someone answered before?" I asked. "What if the shadow expects courtesy? Then the debt is kept," he said, "and we sit with it." He didn't look at me when he said it, because my face has always told the truth, and he needed, just for a second, to pretend otherwise. Ours became a rope we held on to. The voice spoke sometimes, and sometimes the feet spoke instead, and sometimes the house answered with little sounds houses make when they are thinking of settling. The coal dimmed and brightened like a heartbeat. My mother touched my hair every time the light weakened, as if to count me. Near morning, the knocking stopped, not because the voice surrendered, because the shadow moved on. It lifted from our roof with offended dignity and slid to the house across the lane. The widow's place with the blue shutters and the fig tree that never fruits. Her light came on. It went off. It came on again. We should go to her, I said. We should not, my father said, and for the first time all night his voice carried authority that had nothing to do with fear. We were spared by not answering. Don't spend your mercy like coins. We slept in the day and woke sick with the particular guilt of people who survived at someone else's expense. The widow didn't open her windows for a week. When she did, the shutters hung crooked, and her fig tree had grown 3 new branches in the shape of fingers pointing at our roof. At market, the old women told me what they tell all children who watch too closely. The shadow is old. It remembers promises we forgot. It eats lies. It eats kindness too. If you leave it uncovered on a table, it will take what is first offered, and if nothing is offered, it will take the one who asks what it wants. I brought bread to the widow, left it at her door, knocked, and ran the way good intentions run when they know they are late. That night, the shadow chose the house at the far end of the square, the one with the new paint. It pouted there like a scolded child, as if the freshness offended it. The family inside answered immediately, voices raised, questions asked. A radio turned up as if sound could be louder than what the roof was learning. By morning, the paint had wilted. The new door had warped. The father stood in the square, staring at nothing, his jaw moving like a man chewing a memory that won't swallow. It went on like this all spring, the shadow pausing, the bells ringing themselves polite, the village pretending the mountain was just a mountain. Some nights it took a chicken. Some nights it took a secret. Once it took the sound of water from every tap for an entire day until we remembered to carry buckets to the well together like we used to. The night it came back to us, we were ready in all the wrong ways. We had boiled new basil. We had chalked circles inside circles. We had collected coals in a bowl, as if light were cumulative. We had not prepared our mouths for silence. The attic door knocked 3 times, then 3 again, not because it was impatient, but because it is a comfort to things that are older than counting to arrange themselves in numbers that remember altars. Please, the voice said, and we had not heard please before. My father's face changed very slightly, not in sympathy, in recognition. He had waited his whole life to hear that word from the shadow, and he had never decided what he would do if it came. Don't answer, my mother whispered, and on her tongue it sounded like prayer and like something else, like apology. The knob turned. The door didn't open. I stood. My legs did it. Not bravery, not foolishness, that biological thing that makes children step forward when they are named, even if no one has said their name aloud. I placed my hand flat on the door and felt not wood, not paint, not cold. I felt my own house looking back at me through the grain. The years our table wobbled, and we propped it with folded paper. The winter the roof let snow in like sugar. The day my father sat with his head in his hands because the bank had a face, and that face did not like him. What do you want? I asked. The voice answered without moving air. Something you can carry, it said, so you do not think you left your debt behind. A small laugh escaped me. It was ugly and human, and broke the shape of the room. Fine, I said. Take my sleep. Silence. Then the sound of agreement that exists in the space before 2 hands shake. The knob cooled under my palm. The door receded into the hatch as if doors could be shy. The coal went out without smoke. Foolish, my mother said. One word. Fond as a slap that keeps you from stepping into the road. Wise, my father said, and I heard all the night he'd sat with his eyes open, stored inside the syllable. The shadow left at dawn. It took my sleep with it. It did not take my dreams. It left those because dreams belong to whoever has to carry them, not to the thing that made them heavier. For weeks I forgot how to close my eyes, and when I remembered, my body treated it as a bad habit. I watched the roof tiles of our house collect moonlight. I watched the square empty and fill. I counted the neighbors' breaths through open windows and learned which ones falter and which ones hold. I went to the widow's door and found bread there, hers for me, and we stood on either side of the wood and said nothing, which is another way of answering. When summer came, the shadow moved up valley, the way weather does when it remembers where it's going. Babies were born. A cow died for reasons that had nothing to do with old debts and everything to do with the day being too hot. The river wrote its same letter across the stones and expected no reply. Sometimes late, I hear 3 polite knocks exactly where a door doesn't belong. I place my hand against the hatch and feel my house remember me. I tell it a small true thing I kept back during the spring, and the wood drinks it like water. The shadow prefers what you think you hid. If it comes to your roof, don't answer. If you must, offer it something you can survive without, and survive without it. And when the bells ring by themselves, set a plate for the guest even if he won't eat. There is a language older than bargains. It sounds like a family breathing together in the dark until the light has the courage to be mourning. For now it is enough. Now, on to the next story. The phone booth had been dead for years. The glass panes were fogged with the kind of grime that only time applies. Each rectangle, a small gray aquarium for moths and dust. It sat on the corner by the old post office, a relic left standing out of habit, the way a town leaves a statue up when no one remembers who it is. It started ringing on a Tuesday, noon. Everyone heard it. The sound cut through traffic like a thin blade. Not loud, exactly insistent. The first ring stopped the mailman in his tracks. The second made Mrs. Kivett drop her grocery bag. Eggs broke in slow motion. By the third, the whole block had turned to look at the booth that hadn't called anyone in a decade. No one moved to answer. It's amazing how quickly adults remember being children when a dare is implied. It stopped after 7 rings. It started again at dusk. 7, again at midnight. 7. The mayor called the phone company, and a man came with a tool belt and a shrug and declared that nothing was connected to anything. The cord inside the booth wasn't plugged into the ground. The wires in the street were bones. On the second day, a teenager answered, because teenagers are who we send to speak to the future. He pushed the folding door in, grimaced at the smell, and lifted the receiver with 2 fingers, the way you lift a dead thing that still might surprise you. Hello? He listened. His face went blank, then thoughtful, then frightened in the small way you can hide if you've practiced on mirrors. Yeah, he said after a long time, I remember. He hung up and walked home like rain had started, and he didn't want anyone to see him getting wet. No one could make him say who it was. Not his mother, not his friends, not the pastor who mistook curiosity for care. He changed his route to school to avoid the corner. On the third day, the booth rang at 7 minutes past 7 in the morning. Mr. Rosario, who has not been late to the hardware store in 30 years, stepped inside and picked up. Hola, he said cautiously. He listened. He said nothing else for a very long while. Tears rolled down his face into his mustache. He laughed once, the bad kind, the kind you make when you want to be polite to a pain that is visiting. When he hung up, he placed his forehead against the glass pane as if it were a cool hand. It was my mother. He told no one and everyone. She asked where I put her red scarf. She was always losing it. His mother has been dead since I was a child. After that, answering became a ritual. Not everyone did it. Some kept a wide berth, as if the booth were a stray dog that might bite. Others waited for the ring like church bells, hoping their name was in its mouth. It always rang 7 times, and if you weren't inside by the 6th, the door would stick on the 7th in a way that felt personal. It never called the same person twice. When it rang for me, the light was doing that late afternoon trick where it turns polite. I was walking home with a bag of flour and a lemon because pie is a spell you can cast on a house to make it remember happiness. The first ring reached into my chest and plucked the string that runs from childhood to the place where I store things I mean to forgive myself for someday. The second ring made me cross the street. By the third, I was at the door. By the fourth, I was inside, smelling the booth's old breath. I lifted the receiver on the fifth and said the thing you say when you don't know who you're about to be. Hello? A pause that wasn't silence, air moving in a room I couldn't see. Hey kid, said my brother. He has been dead 5 years. The sound of his voice was a chair pushed back from a table, footsteps in a hallway you know by heart. I sat without meaning to. The booth did not have a chair. I just found myself lower, knees aching pleasantly. Where are you? I asked because grief trains you to ask useless questions. He laughed the old way, a little higher on the tail, as if gladness were something you could temper. Wrong end of the line, he said, but the line is thin tonight. I closed my eyes. The lemon in my bag pressed a small sun into my thigh. What's it like? I asked because people do. Like taking off boots you wore too long, he said. Like remembering a name took too much effort, and now you don't need names. Like walking in a house without corners. I put my head against the glass, against the town, against the day trying to be ordinary. Why the phone? I asked. The living need doors, he said gently. We don't, but we remember how to knock. We talked the way people talk in kitchens at the ends of parties, when the good plates are stacked and the last song on the playlist has been replayed 3 times because no one wants to go home. He asked about our father's stubborn knee. I asked about the dog that carried his shoe for a week after the funeral. He apologized for the last fight over nothing. I apologized for not calling back the day before the accident, as if the day before any accident were a place you could live indefinitely if you bought the right map. How long? I asked when the booth's air changed. A subtle thing like weather rearranging its furniture. 7 minutes, he said. The line learns you, and then it forgets you. That's its kindness. What do you need? I asked because love likes errands. He thought, or seemed to. Perhaps he wanted to comfort me with the shape of thinking. Hide the red scarf, he said, and laughed when I made the confused sound he must have expected. Sorry, not yours. I'm borrowing someone's ending. He shifted, and I heard the sound of a chair in a room I will never see. Live where your kindness doesn't exhaust you, he said. Stop answering numbers you don't recognize unless you want to. Lock the door to the room that hurts and open it once a year with cake. I don't bake enough, I said. You're holding flour and a lemon, he said, and I could see him grin even with my eyes shut. You're doing fine. The line thinned. I felt it in the bones of the booth. I have to go, he said, and the words didn't wound. They just were. Answer for someone else if you can, he added. Sometimes the number's wrong. The click when he left the line was small and decent. The receiver was heavier when it held no one. I stepped out into a town that looked exactly the same, and wasn't. The mailman waved. The mayor pretended this wasn't happening. A child pressed both hands to the glass and left perfect prints. The booth rang for months. The stories braided themselves through the town's days. A widow spoke to a daughter who had never lived to turn 12. A gambler refused to pick up and then ran 4 blocks on the 7th ring and found the door stuck and wept in a way that made forgiveness feel like a thing the air could do. The pastor answered once and said nothing after, which is how I knew the call was for him and not for his congregation. One night it rang, and no one was near. The sound bounced off the post office, off the closed bakery, off the statue whose name we'd forgotten. I ran because pie crust can wait, and grief has never been patient. I pulled the door, lifted the receiver, and said hello to buy time. A woman spoke, a voice I didn't know. She said a name that wasn't mine. syllables soft as a lullaby. I told her she had the wrong number. She laughed like turning a page. No, she said, just the wrong hands. And then she asked, is he there? The boy with the blue jacket and the bad haircut? I looked up. Across the square, a kid in a blue jacket hovered, halfway between leaving and staying. He'd been circling the booth for days, waiting for the ring to forgive him for not being brave. I waved him in. He frowned, wary. It's for you, I mouthed. He came, shoulders hunched against a weather that wasn't weather, and I handed him the receiver, the way you hand a bride a bouquet, and hope she remembers what hands were for. He said, Mom, and folded up like paper. After that, I started going on the hour, not because I wanted another call. My brother's 7 minutes were sufficient for a lifetime, but because the booth had become for our town a hinge. We gathered near it the way people gather near fires they pretend are incidental. We kept a list, not of who had answered, but of who shouldn't have to do it alone. Teenagers, Mr. Rosario, the woman who sells shoes but never tries them on. When the phone company finally sent a crew to remove the booth, complaints from up the chain about liability and vandalism and the threat of rust, the mayor signed the order and then pretended he hadn't. The crew came with wrenches and a truck. The first man touched the door and stepped back with tears in his eyes. The second man made a call from his cell to no one and cried too. They left the booth standing. Paperwork got lost. Rust was patient. The town was more so. It rings less now. The line, I think, has learned our names the way old songs do and doesn't need to practice as much. When it does ring, someone answers. Sometimes it's for the air and not for the hand, and we hang up gently. Sometimes it's for the wrong person, and we pass the receiver until the voice on the other end sighs, relieved, and begins. If you hear it, don't be afraid of the glass or the grime or the way your reflection looks like someone you owe. Step inside, close the little door behind you. Say hello like you mean it, because you do. Don't ask too many questions. Let the voice choose the shape of the 7 minutes. When it's time to go, you'll hear it in the line and in your ribs. And when you hang up, go buy flour and a lemon. Bake a pie for the room that hurts. Lock it and visit once a year with cake and a fork. Answer if it rings for someone else and you're the one standing nearest. We keep each other's calls when we can. That, more than anything, is what makes a town. Now, on to the next story. I was the only one left on the platform when the station decided to remember me. Greystone is small as stations go, 2 tracks, a brick building with a slate roof that leaks in March, a clock that gains 3 minutes a week no matter what the handyman swears he did. After the last scheduled departure, 11:45 eastbound, the train people swear by and the rest of the town ignores. The platforms go to sleep like anything else. The vending machines hum. The pigeons find their beams. The clerk in the booth lowers the metal shutter with a finality that wants to be a kindness. I should have left when he did. My duffel was heavy with the life I couldn't afford, and I was tired in the way that feels like rust has decided it is you now. But I didn't have the money for a cab, and I didn't want to go back to the apartment whose walls had learned my fights. It was colder under the canopy than it should have been for October. The air had that metallic tang city nights get when rain has recently argued with stone. I kept my hands in my pockets so my fingers wouldn't remember what they were for. The station emptied by increments. A janitor pushed a yellow cart and did not meet my eye. A couple argued in low voices until their words frayed, and they went outside to finish doing that somewhere less acoustic. An old man slept with his head back and his mouth open until the guard shook him gently and pointed him toward the taxi rank. The clock read 12:03, then 12:11, then I stopped looking. The rails began to sing. You can feel trains before you see them if you give your attention to the right place. The metal takes the news first, and then the air. I felt the hum in my shoes, and then behind my ribs, the faintest pressure, like an elevator works on your organs. The light at the far end of the platform did not turn green. No announcement belled. No headlamp wrote a promise into the dark. A wind moved along the tracks, not a gust, not weather, an exhale with a destination. It brought with it the smell of dry iron and something like water left too long in a flower vase. A shape detached itself from the night and became a train without the courtesy of headlights. It came in soft, as if it were trying not to wake anyone, as if stealth were kindness. The cars were old, not modern, sleek, but not the kind of venerable red you take your grandchildren to at the holiday festival either. Smooth-sided, windowed, forgettable, a stripe of paint along the middle that might have been blue or green in better light. It slowed at my portion of platform with the practiced efficiency of a habit. The doors sighed like tired lungs and parted. If you've never stepped into a room with the exact temperature of a morgue drawer, you don't know the kind of cold this was. Not winter cold, absence cold. What light there was came from nowhere, a grayness that should have had a source, and did not. The aisle ran down the center of the car, upholstered seats in pairs faced forward. The windows showed me my own uncertainty and a smear of my own breath. There were people sitting. That was the first relief. None of them moved. That was the second realization. I stood just inside the door with my duffel at my ankle and told myself I was going to step back out, wait on the platform for a train that had headlights like an honest machine. The doors snicked shut as if they were tired of hearing me lie to myself. The car jolted, the station slid away, the world beyond the windows forgot to exist. "Ticket," said a voice soft as paper. He sat near the door, the kind of man photographs and old books call a commuter, suit bagging a little at the knees, tie too narrow, hat in his lap with a sweatband gone dark. His eyes were open. They were not certain who they belonged to. His hand came up slow, palm out, a ritual more than a request. I dug for my wallet before it occurred to me that there would be no scanner here, no place to tap a phone or a card that is trying to be one. "I missed the last one," I said. The clerk said. The farther end of the car answered, "Leave him." A woman sat by the window 3 rows down. She had long black hair that looked like it had been brushed recently by hands that knew how, a dress that belonged to 3 styles ago, and none, and the kind of posture you hold when sitting has become a job. "He's new," she added, as if that explained anything. The man with the hat sighed his breath out and folded his hand back into his lap. He did not blink. No one else did either, and that was the moment I placed the wrongness. The car was full of people who were not breathing like I was. The woman crooked 2 fingers. "Sit," she said, "before he comes." I have been told I obey too readily, when instruction feels like a rope thrown into water. I sat opposite her because her eyes did not look like tacks. Up close I could see that her dress had been mended neatly at the seam under her arm. Her left knuckle had a white scar where a ring had once rubbed. The smell around her was citrus and old books, and a trace of something iron that had no right to be on anyone. "What is this?" I said. It came out small, a child trying not to wake someone. "This is the last train," she said. "It doesn't have a time printed. It has a tendency." Her mouth made that half smile a teacher makes when you get close to the answer and might need to own it yourself. I looked back at the door. It had forgotten how to open. The window showed only my face and a gray that could be fog or could be blank. "They'll tell you you need a ticket," she said. "If you have one, they take it. If you don't, they take what a ticket would be worth." "What does that?" The car shivered. Something tall moved at the far end without the insult of actually walking. You know the shape of authority, even when it is dressed in old cloth. Let's commit to that because something in me insisted wore a conductor's uniform, black enough to catch no light. with buttons that made small moons where brass decides not to die. The peaked cap was pulled low. The shadow where his face should have been felt like a place you could get lost in and never be offered a map. He went passenger by passenger, stopping with the courtesy of commerce. They held out their hands. He took something from each with a pinch, as if he were collecting coins you couldn't see. A young woman in a red coat sagged after he passed, and her red seemed older. An older man pressed his hand to his chest and then let it drop, as if the gesture didn't belong to him. The suit with the too narrow tie managed a small smile and then forgot he had. My chest tightened physically, as if the air had decided to become a hand. When the conductor reached our row and turned the blank where his face should be toward me, my name left my pockets. I felt it happen. The hook pulling, the slack, the loss. Not the syllables people say when they need you. The fact of the name, the way it anchors you to your bones. "Ticket?" said the absence. "I don't." My voice was behind glass. "He's new," the woman said. Her voice was low without pleading. "He hasn't paid yet." The conductor's head turned toward her a fraction. There was a pressure shift, ears popping when you haven't climbed. The absence moved on, and the air remembered how to be shared. When I could, I looked at her. "You know him." "No one knows him," she said. "He knows you." "What does he take?" She looked at my hands on the seat, at the whiteness of the knuckles I had not intended. "Pieces," she said simply, "small at first. What you think you can spare." The train didn't go past scenery so much as through possibility. Stations approached, platforms like sketches, lamps that made rings of light where a floor might be if someone funded it, and slid by without stopping. The doors sighed open at none of them, and sighed closed again, as if to stretch. At one, a child ran along the platform with something limp under her arm. At the next, the platform was a corridor, and the corridor was a throat, and I stopped trying to make sense of them in sequence. "Where does it go?" I asked. "Down," she said, and when I looked at her in the way you look at someone who has chosen a metaphor, she added, "Away." The stops make you think you have a choice. Choice is part of the harm. What do I do? She stared at me for a long beat, and I had the thought, sudden and indecent, that she was beautiful, not for the symmetry of her features, but for the steadiness of someone who had been waiting a long time for the right stranger. "You jump," she said, "when it slows, before the doors, before he wants to ask again." "And you?" She smiled in a way that suggested all decisions had been tried. "I got on before they put numbers on the trains to tell you where you were going. I'm not new. Some days I still remember what my apartment smelled like when the radiator had a good day. That's not enough to get off." "What's your name?" "It was Clara," she said, and there was an ache in the past tense, shaped like a violin string pulled too far across its bridge. "I keep it because they didn't take it the first time. I gave them other things I thought I could spare." He came again. I felt him before I saw him, the way you feel a deep bass note through drywall. He didn't look at me because I had only been taught once, and fairness is a thing even this service seems to respect. He looked at Clara. She held out her hand, and he pinched something from her palm with a delicacy that would have been tender if you didn't know it as theft. "What was that?" I asked when he had gone. "The smell of the radiator," she said, very matter of fact, and I believed her. We passed a stop that had no platform, only a field of chairs arranged like a lecture. The chairs were full. The people in them looked up as we slid by, and their eyes did not change, and one of them had my boss's face at 30, and I hated the accuracy of it. "How do you know when to jump?" I asked. "When you hate staying more than you fear falling," she said. "For you, that will come quick. You brought no blankets. You could come with me." She shook her head. "You don't start by being generous to me. You start by being selfish enough to live." The car shuddered. Ahead, a stop gathered shape, a platform with painted lines, a clock that could have been a twin to Greystones if time had agreed to stay asleep. A rack of newspapers wrapped in string. The train slowed, not enough to be safe, enough to be wicked. Clara touched my wrist. Her hand was cool, not cold. Now, she said, the doors hissed to make you believe in them. I didn't use them. I shoved my duffel ahead and threw myself after it. The air hit back. My shoulder hit concrete and became the whole world for exactly one heartbeat. Then the rest of the pain argued loud enough to be listened to. I rolled away from the edge because the edge wants to see if you want to visit the underside of things. The platform was empty, no newspapers, no clock hands. Whatever the train had shown me to make the notion of landing less obscene evaporated as soon as it could stop behaving. I looked up. The train was gone, not receding, gone. The rails were two black snakes going their own ways. The electric hum of the station was wrong in the way a room feels when someone else has just left it. Stairs rose, concrete patched with gum and old moss. My hands shook so hard I could not trust them with my own pockets. When I stood, my knees tried to convince me they grasped prayer. I took the stairs. Greystone breathed again at the top, like a chest that has just decided there will be more of this. The clock said 12:07, which was a lie of one kind or another. The vending machines hummed their promise of sugar. The posters on the wall made perky suggestions about autumn weekend deals to towns I could never afford. There was a draft that had not been there earlier, a small ribbon of air that smelled like old citrus, and a radiator. My duffel had not made the jump as successfully as I had. It was no longer beside me. I reached to check my wallet and phone, and found absence where both used to live. Something in my chest went to one knee. I walked outside, and the town was the town. Street lamps wore their halos like saints who had stopped being for a moment. The bar at the corner had turned its chairs up on the tables and hosed a day down the drain. My apartment, if I went to it, would be 2 blocks east and 3 north, and there would be a note shoved under the knob because people who like order are very brave when it is late. I stood on the curb and stared down the street and listened to the night give advice and didn't take any of it. I did not see Clara again, not in the way that would have been clean. I saw her in other things, the way frost draws lace in a window and then forgets what it meant, the way the radiator hiccups at 3 in the morning like it is trying to laugh, the way my own name sometimes feels like a jacket I keep putting on backward until I spend a day getting it right. For a week, I did not sleep properly. The door to the bedroom remained open because the closed version felt like a train door learning my hinge. I covered the mirror with a towel and told myself I wasn't doing it for story reasons. Twice at 12:07 exactly, according to an untrustworthy clock, my radio clicked on by itself, and the volume knob turned one notch like a mouth practicing yes. The first time I unplugged it and put the plug on the windowsill where it could watch the rain. The second time I said quietly no to a room that smelled like old citrus and a radiator and the very faintest trace of iron. If this were a different sort of story, that would be that. I would have touched a door the world keeps for fools, and I would have learned. But people who have learned are extravagances this town rarely funds. So I went back to the station because there are habits that look like hope when you squint. Not the next night, not an invitation. A week later, when the cold had sharpened from suggestion to policy, I bought a coffee from the machine that tastes like burned promises and sat on the bench under the clock, and I watched the 11:45 go and the last janitor leave and the guard check the corners with his flashlight beam that knows more than he'll tell. When the platform was mine again, in that way silence sometimes hands you responsibility you didn't ask to hold. I stood, and I waited for rails to sing. They did. The wind gathered itself and chose the low way along the track. The train slid in without apology. I told myself I would stay on the platform. There is a lot of telling yourself that happens around things like this. When the doors opened, The breath of the car had the smell that memory does when it tries to sneak in, wearing new clothes. The man with the too narrow tie did not look at me when I stepped in. The woman in the red coat had her forehead against the glass, like she was listening for someone who would never bother to knock. I walked down the aisle, and every person I passed felt like a word I had once known how to spell and now could only guess at. Clara sat where she had sat. She turned her head as if she had been saving that motion. Her mouth made the shape of my name, but decided not to get me used to the sound of it. "I thought you got off for good," she said. "I got off once," I said. "That isn't the same. You're not supposed to come back. Neither are you," I said without meaning to be unkind. She smiled in that way that suggests the rule has been broken, and the rule does not care. "He'll come," she said, and he did. The conductor's presence bent the aisle. He did not turn toward me immediately, and I understood this to be an acknowledgement that the game only works when the person playing thinks they have consented. He paused at the young man with an earring who had a finger resting on the edge of his seat, as if he had been about to stand and had been told not to. He took something invisible from the boy's palm. The earring dulled. When he reached us, he held out a gloved hand. "Ticket," he said. I had brought something. It was stupid. It was also all I had. From my jacket pocket, I took a photograph of my mother at 17. Hair caught in a late summer wind, cigarette held away from her face, like she had been born elegant and only had to remember it. I had stolen the picture from one of the boxes my sister and I had labeled "Keep," because we knew better than to label anything else. I held the photograph up. He did not reach for it. He pressed 2 fingers to the air just above the image and pinched. It was not the picture he took. The paper remained against my skin. What left me was the smell of the day I had scanned it with my phone. My mother's laugh at the corner of my apartment that was always dusty, the taste of my coffee, the relief that a picture had stayed. I felt the empty place he left like the small ache where a tooth used to be. "That's not a ticket," I said. His head tilted a fraction. The cap's shadow deepened. "Everything is," he said, and went on. "He can be refused," Clara said quietly, after the pressure lifted. "That's the other harm. He can be refused only by refusing to pay a price you won't be able to live with if you do." "What did you pay?" "I don't know anymore," she said. That was the first thing. The stops slid past, each an attempt at bribery in a new tone. A platform full of people, holding out their hands with palms up as if they had the law on their side. A corridor of doors, each cracked just enough to show a sliver of light and a shadow passing. A field where a train could sit and wait for grass to learn patience. At one, a station that was exactly Greystone, except the clock read wrong, and the posters on the wall were the ones I had taken down 2 years ago, and the vending machine had a flavor of soda they stopped making when I was a child because it tasted like cough syrup and persistence. The train slowed so sweetly at that one, I could have stepped off without learning anything painful about gravity. "I could get off here," I said. "I could go upstairs and find a different version of my apartment, where we never had the fight and the letter never came, and the clerk at the booth doesn't know me, and it would keep long enough for me to believe in it. That's one of them," she said. "I used to have a stop where the music from the bar on the corner was always the song I loved in May and never heard again. He found it for me. He finds them for you. That's how he gets you to pay twice. What happens if I stay? You become the kind of person who calls it a bargain." She stood then, suddenly, as if her body had moved before she felt like humoring it. The door at the far end of the car had opened on its own, and beyond it I saw a short vestibule and then another car, and in that car I saw people standing, not sitting. The light was different there, warmer, almost honest, and the air changed as if something in me believed dawn had been invented again. "You should leave," she said. "I can't do it with you. It has to be your fear. And you, I make other people leave," she said, with a shrug, almost proud. "Everyone needs a job." We went to the vestibule. The train slowed as it slid past a station with a name I recognized and had never visited, a name from a childhood map where the letters meant far. The doors hissed. We didn't use them. We stepped between cars. The second carriage had a bar at one end. You could lean your elbows and pretend a drink had been poured for you if you wanted your mouth tricked. A man stood there with a napkin under his glass and said to no one, "Cheers," and the conductor appeared next to him like an option and pinched something you couldn't see from his fingers. I wanted to pretend the thing he took was the taste of the drink. The window in this car showed me a different outside. Not stations, not platforms. A city I knew and did not. Streets ghosted by light like web, windows lit and then unlit in no sequence I could claim, bridges drawing lines under lines. My heart did the small double beat it does when the plane dips, and the pilot speaks to prove the plane is paying attention. "Jump," Clara whispered. It wasn't advice, it was the only grammar we had left. I didn't. I walked to the bar as if the man pouring could offer me an argument. Behind the counter, a shelf of bottles held labels in fonts that had not existed yet. One label had my father's handwriting on it. I reached and my fingers met glass that was cooler than anything has the right to be. "Don't buy from him," Clara said, "even if the drink is yours." "Do you ever get to drink again?" I asked, and the laugh she made was exactly human. The conductor turned toward us, and the air thickened, and I chose fear because it was the only thing I owned that still behaved. When the train leaned into something like a curve, and the bodies in the car inclined together as if choreographed, I put my hand flat on the bar, and then on the edge of the doorway, and then into the dark between cars, and used that grip to trust that falling is a fact, not a suggestion. Clara didn't move. She stood where I had stood a week ago, posture like a job. "Go," she said. It had the sound of a word she practiced and liked for the shape it gave her mouth. The jump hurt less this time, because the first time had taught me what stupidity feels like in your shoulder. I hit the platform, rolled, swore, laughed once without wanting to, and lay with my spine against concrete, and watched the underside of the canopy above me, pretend it had never met rain. When I looked down the tracks, there was only track. At the top of the stairs, Greystone was itself enough to forgive me. The clock read 12:07 with the stubbornness of the obtuse. I walked outside, and the air had warmed the way it does when stories are not doing the breathing for you. I went home. I made the kind of coffee you make when you're trying not to wake yourself up. I took my radio and put it in a cupboard and closed the cupboard and put the kettle on top of the cupboard, because petty victories are real. Then I took the photograph of my mother into the kitchen light. The paper was the same. The face was the same. I could see the corner of her mouth where cigarette met the joke. When I held it to my nose, I smelled nothing. It broke me in a way a poem would approve of, and I did not let it. That week I looked for tickets. Not the paper kind, the other kind. Things I could be tricked into thinking I could spare. I found a shoebox of letters and put them back. I found the sweater my ex left and put it in a bag for the thrift store because leaving it in the drawer had become an altar. I found the eviction notice and folded it into a paper plane and threw it at the ceiling until it lodged in the fan, and then I stood on a chair and took it down and burned it in a pie tin. Fire is the only punchline I trust. Sometimes now, at night, the rails hum under the city like a thought you are trying not to have. I take long ways home. I look at station clocks and the minute hands give me back the correct time, which is a gift I didn't know you could negotiate for. When the wind takes the low way along the track, I do not wait for doors. I see Clara in other places, a woman on a bus with a scar where a ring once rubbed, a figure in a laundromat who folds with the care of someone whose hands remember something and refuse to forget it, a reflection in a shop window that makes a mouth against the glass and then doesn't bother to fog it. Once, on a Sunday morning that felt like mercy, I felt the exact temperature of her hand on my wrist as I stepped too close to the edge of a subway platform, and I stepped back and said thank you to no name. If you ask me what the last train wants, I will tell you this: it wants rent. For each time you say aloud that a place has let you down, it offers you a car that can carry you farther from the responsibility of being person-shaped in a world that will make you sit and wait and think you should be grateful. It takes small pieces first: the smell of a radiator, the taste of a drink, the name of a day. It will let you leave if you are willing to jump while it is still pretending to be gentle. Some nights I hear the ticket office shutter slide down in my dreams. Some nights a voice says ticket very softly from the cupboard where the radio lives, and I get up and put the kettle back on top of the door like I am a person who knows how to keep himself. On the worst nights, the conductor walks down the aisle of my ribcage and pinches something I can't name out of the palm of a heart that has already done its work. I wake with my hands open and count to a number that used to mean stairs in the house where I learned to be tall. If you find yourself on the platform after midnight and the rails begin to remember their purpose, listen to the advice that comes through a static you don't deserve. It won't always be mine. It won't always be kind. Jump before the doors open. Refuse to get good at paying. If you carry a photograph, put it in your shoe where no one can reach it without making you dance. And if you meet a woman with long black hair who sits as if sitting paid her rent, and she tells you her name was Clara in a tense that means once and maybe again, do what she says the first time. She has work to do. So do you. The world above the stairs is not much, but it's ours, and the radiators, when they are good, still make a sound that with practice you can keep. Now, on to the next story. I didn't believe the stories about the river until I saw the lights myself. Everyone in town had a version. They said if you drove the South Road by the water at night, you'd see lanterns bobbing on the current, sometimes red, sometimes white, sometimes blue, like a torch drowned too deep. Old men said they were the souls of miners who drowned in the floods of 22, forever looking for the path home. Teenagers swore they were UFOs, swamp gas, or headlights playing tricks. The church folk shook their heads and muttered about demons that mimicked light to lure you close. I thought it was folklore, the kind towns like ours needed to keep themselves interesting, until the night I followed them. It started simple. I was restless. The cabin I rented sat 2 miles off the river, with no neighbors except raccoons that knew how to raid trash bins. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't read. The night pressed heavy, so I got in my truck and drove. The road to the river was narrow, lined with leaning oaks that made the headlights crawl like nervous fingers. At the bend where the asphalt ran close to the water, I saw it, a pale blue light hovering just above the current, bobbing gently as if tied to a boat that wasn't there. I slowed, squinting. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't the moon. It pulsed softly, like it was breathing. Then another appeared 20 yards downriver, glowing red. Then another, white closer to the bank. I pulled over, killed the engine. The night swallowed the sound, leaving only the lapping of water and the drone of insects. The lights didn't waver. Something in me said go home. But another part, the part that's broken in people like me, said find out. I climbed down the embankment, gravel crunching under my boots. The first light, the pale blue one, drifted closer. It was the size of a lantern flame, but there was no smoke, no heat. I reached out. It darted back. Not fast, not natural, like it was teasing. Hello, I said, my own voice sounding foolish. The light pulsed once, then it moved further downstream, pausing as if waiting for me. I followed. The riverbank narrowed, brush grabbing my sleeves, mud sucking at my boots. The lights formed a path now, blue, red, white, red again, like breadcrumbs scattered on black water. always just far enough to make me chase, never close enough to touch. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. No frogs, no insects, even the river seemed to hush. My chest tightened, my breath came loud in the silence. Then I saw her. She stood in the shallows 20 feet ahead, water lapping at her calves. A woman in a gray dress that clung to her body like it had been soaked for years. Her hair hung long and black, dripping into the current. Her face was pale, almost luminous, and her eyes burned like the lantern lights. The lights hovered around her now, orbiting her head like fireflies, too disciplined to scatter. I froze. She raised her hand, beckoning. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs moved forward, one step, then another, as if her gesture carried weight. The mud sucked deeper at my boots. The water reached my knees. "Come closer," she whispered. Her voice wasn't carried by the night. It was inside my skull, intimate as breath. My mouth opened without my permission. "Who are you?" She tilted her head. The lights brightened. One who waits, one who was left. My feet kept moving. I was chest deep now, current tugging. The light swirled faster, dizzying. Her hands stretched toward me, and then I remembered what the old men had said. The lights are bait. Don't follow them, no matter what they promise. I slammed my eyes shut, dug my nails into my palms until the sting broke the trance. When I opened them again, the lights had multiplied, dozens, maybe hundreds, bobbing on the water, surrounding me in a ring of color. The woman's face twisted, not angry, but hungry. Her mouth opened, wider and wider, until it split her face in half. The lights poured toward me, searing bright, their glow filling my eyes until I couldn't see. I threw myself backward, half swimming, half stumbling. My hands clawed at mud, branches, anything solid. Something brushed my ankle, slim fingers, cold as river stone. I kicked wildly, broke free, and scrambled up the bank on hands and knees. Behind me, the lights wailed. That's the only way I can describe it. Not sound, but pressure, a chorus of grief that pressed against my bones. Then silence. I didn't stop running until my truck was in sight. I tore the door open, fumbled the keys, and gunned the engine so hard, gravel spit from under the tires. The rearview mirror showed nothing but darkness. Back at the cabin, I bolted the door and sat shaking until dawn. I told no one who would believe me. In town, they just nod, the way people nod when they've heard another fool join the list of near misses. But I've noticed something since. Every night when the river is close, I see faint glimmers through the trees, not bright enough to mistake for lanterns, not loud enough to make me follow, just enough to remind me they're there. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear her voice, soft and patient. Not yet, but soon. Now, on to the next story. They say houses remember, but remember is too gentle a word. A house absorbs, it seasons itself with you. The walls take your arguments and your laughter. The stairs memorize the weight of you coming home. The kitchen keeps what you admit to the sink. If you live long enough inside a place, you start borrowing each other's habits. The house on Ashwood Lane had lived with too many people to be polite about it anymore. It stood on a corner that had lost its elm decades ago and never replaced it. 3 stories of narrow windows and a front porch too shallow for chairs. Its clapboards were repainted often enough that the paint's history made its own topography. Ridges like lines in a palm. It had a plaque the realtor loved to point out. Below it, someone had scratched a second date with a nail, 1978, then crossed it out, then written 2002. I bought it because I needed rooms, and it was rooms. I did not require charm or lawns. I told myself the price was low because of a boiler that wanted attention, and because the inspector had shrugged when I asked about wiring and said, "It works until it doesn't." In the kitchen, a built-in glass front cabinet tilted a degree and a half. In the entryway, a transom window stuck halfway open as if it had been mid-sigh for years. The floors sloped together stubbornly toward the center of the house, as if the building were gathering itself for a point. I moved in on a Thursday with 4 friends and a rented truck, and the kind of jokes people make when stairs push back. The house accepted the boxes with a patience it had learned from decades of boxes. It watched us without malice. It waited for us to leave. That first night, the bedroom door opened at 3:12 a.m. The room had been warm when I fell asleep. The air that came through the door had the temperature of hallways. A draft, I told myself, then wondered why drafts knock. I lay still, bare feet padded around the bed. Not heavy, not childlike either, a weight that didn't care to be categorized. I sat up. Nothing. I set my phone to video with the flash on and stared at the small screen until my eyes dried. The door moved a hair and settled. The hallway beyond held its breath. In the morning, small handprints smudged the wall opposite the bed. 4 fingers and a thumb, precise as stamps, the color of dust. I wiped them with vinegar and a cloth, as if the house were a counter. That evening, they were back, lower, as if the child had been standing on something earlier and didn't need it now. The neighbors did their duty: pies, advice, names. On the second afternoon, Mrs. Lang from the corner walked me around the block, pointed at gutters, at hedges that don't belong, at the sky when it does a certain thing before rain. When we came back by Ashwood, she paused on the sidewalk as if she weren't sure whether to take one more step. "You'll hear things," she said. "Don't answer questions you aren't asked." "What kind of things?" She made a small shape with her mouth that admitted the existence of a list and then closed it. "Open your windows in winter once in a while. Houses need to breathe. Same as people." She patted my arm as if I had delivered good news and crossed the street without looking. At night, the house breathed on its own. Heat ticked in the registers. The upstairs bath pipe shuddered with the ghost of water. Wood flexed. The sounds organized themselves. A woman humming in the kitchen, the tune unambitious, the hum a habit, a man pacing in the study, the way sound changes when it crosses a rug, a child racing down the upstairs hall and stopping at exactly the place where my bedroom door meets the casing. I did the ordinary exorcisms, salt across thresholds, because my grandmother had cheap white candles and sills for light shapes. A bell rung room to room because a friend had sworn it had helped during a bad year. The bell's note made a place in the air, and the air closed over it. The third week, a toy horse stood on the mantel. I hadn't put it there. It was wood, small enough for a child's pocket, varnish worn to a fondness, not antique store charming, necessary. I put it in a drawer. It reappeared on the mantel at noon. I threw it out. It was on the kitchen table when I woke from a nap, standing neatly on the seam where the leaves join. I set it on the porch railing facing the street. In the morning, it stood in the hallway at ankle height, and I almost broke my neck tripping over it. "Okay," I said aloud, "because compromise keeps the peace. You live here too." I put it back on the mantel, center, where the wood had a slight lighter place that suggested long occupation. The house softened around that. The humming grew fainter. The footsteps took up a gentler route. The handprints stayed, but moved with me room to room, as if the child were learning the new house by my tour. I learned the history the way you learn any complicated thing, by collecting small specific facts until they begin to stack into a structural truth. The town records listed owners who left suddenly. One family had defaulted 3 months after a baby's funeral. Another had sold at a loss right after a fire that never fully scorched a wall. An electrician's widow had signed the deed with a hand that made careful schoolteacher loops. She died in a smaller house across town 6 months later. In a microfilm of a 1931 paper, I found a 2-inch article. "Local girl drowns in well. Mother inconsolable." The address was mine. I avoided the well. It had a lid someone had secured with rope, and the rope was older than my parents' marriage. I left it older. It is one thing to know a house holds its old weather. It is another thing to wake in the study with a revolver in your hand. The barrel was cold and oiled. The weight was the kind of truth you can tell in the dark. I was not seated where I had fallen asleep. I had not come down the stairs. The chair knew me anyway. The clock that had not worked since I moved in ticked solemnly. A whisper behind my ear, that complicated space between house and head, said, careful and kindly, "It doesn't hurt for long." I set the gun on the desk and stepped away. The wood moved under it. I blinked. The gun wasn't there. The desk had a small dent where a heavy thing had rested often. I called a friend and asked if she would sit in the kitchen with me a while. She arrived with bags and a loud laugh. The house met her like a dog that's good with children, but not men. After an hour, she frowned at her phone. "Do you hear a baby?" she asked. I lied. Traffic. She nodded, relieved, and left before night, because somewhere in her body she knew I would ask, and something in the house would not let me. I stopped inviting anyone. The house grew pleased. The humming drew closer to the register I sleep in. Some nights I woke to the smell of bread baking, imaginary and exact. Some mornings the mirror blurred as if hate had exhaled on it. I wrote lists to convince myself I was living. Fix that one sash, oil the hinge, replace the 2 cracked tiles by the stove. I did the work. The list did not get shorter. The basement door locked when I walked by, not with the violence of a movie, with the patient click of a teacher closing a classroom, so you won't be distracted by what is outside. Once, late, I leaned against it and pressed my ear and heard a low conversation in a language I almost understood. The grain's complaint, the pipe's arithmetic, the soft cadence of concrete telling itself how to hold. The 3rd month, the house offered me mercy. It played me a memory that wasn't mine, but could be if I laid down my own, on the nursery floor, because I had begun to call it that. And what you name is yours. The rug rippled like heat over tar. A woman seated in the rocker materialized from nothing, not like a ghost, but like a fact I had missed until now. Hair pinned, sleeves rolled, forearms pale from dishes, a child at her shoulder doing that breathy, almost laugh babies do when milk is near. She looked up at me, irritated at the interruption, then softened, the way mothers soften when they decide you are tired, not malicious. She said, "You'll wake him." She and the boy became gathering smoke that smelled not like fire, but like a wool coat hung near one. It is difficult to pack a bag when the house knows. Boxes opened themselves. The tape would not stick. Keys went missing and turned up exactly where they belonged, laughing the small mean laugh of objects. I threw 3 sweaters in a duffel and zipped it fast and found it empty. An hour later, and the sweaters folded in my drawers better than I ever fold. "Stop," I said into a corner, charming the shadow like wayward salt. "What do you want?" From every room at once. "Stay. Remember with us." The voices layered, the kitchen hum, the study steps, a baby's delicious sigh, the ring of hammer on bracket, a dropped glass, the rise and fall of a fight a couple had had 100 times, and then decided not to have any more because they wanted to see a movie instead. The house had kept it all, and wanted me to shelve myself in that library. "You can keep it," I said. "You don't need me." "We keep what we are given," said the low voice that might have been the man at the desk or the house itself. "We require an indexer." For a week I wrote down everything that happened to me in the house, every small act and sound, and hid the pages where the walls could not eat them in my car, under the mat, at the bottom of a bag of rock salt on the porch. I read them aloud to myself in an ugly voice. I made my memories heavy in the air so they would belong to the air and not the plaster. When the house offered me old bread smell, I burned toast and cursed it. When it offered laughter in the room where I watched shows, I put on a documentary about bridges and let the narrator's soothing voice knit a scaffolding. 2 nights before I left, the well lid creaked, not because the rope failed, because courtesy. I went to the kitchen window and looked out across the scraggly yard and saw nothing. The lid returned to settled. The smell of wet stone came under the back door like a cat. I let the back door stay shut. I slept sitting up by the front door with my bag on my lap and every light on and my shoes on my feet. At 3:12, the bedroom door opened upstairs, even though no one was in the bed. Bare feet circled nothing. The stair treads counted something that was not me. I sat there until the light through the transom remembered morning. I left at noon with the help of 2 men who did not ask questions and did not look up. I did not lock the door. I left the toy horse on the mantel, centered. I told the house in a normal tone that I would not say goodbye. It likes closure too much, it would have used it. I stayed with a friend across town for 6 weeks. The first week, my sleep came back like a stray, skittish. Then sure, the second week, I woke to the smell of bread and left the apartment and walked the block until it was gone. The third week, my phone recorded a voicemail of empty air from my own number. 4 full minutes of the sound a room makes when it is waiting. I deleted it with clean hands. Mrs. Lang watched my lights not burn and delivered gossip the house could not eat. The new buyers were a couple with money and a fondness for crown molding. They brought a designer. She lasted 4 days and left with a cough. The couple closed anyway and hired a contractor who shook his head and unshook it and began. A month later, at Lemon Light, an ambulance came, then left without its siren. Not dead, Mrs. Lang said softly on the phone, as if the house might be listening on both ends. Not his blood. I hired a lawyer to unwind the sale. I paid to get nothing back. Money is a ritual. The house respected it. On the last day, I went to pick up mail that had insisted on finding me there. The porch boards gave under me, the way old bread does under a knife. The front room held its furniture-shaped air. The mantel, of course, held the horse. I didn't touch it. I set the mail on the floor. I said aloud into the corner of the ceiling, "I lived here. I declined to be filed." The transom exhaled. The upstairs hall counted. The kitchen made the sound of a chair sliding back. A child's handprint smudged at knee height on the door frame, fresh as breath on glass. I pulled the door shut behind me. The lock clicked the way it does when a house locks you out of kindness. In my new apartment, flat floors, sullen radiator, windows that stick in summer, I keep nothing I would cry over losing. I buy bread at the bakery and hand the bag to the air. Here, if you want to smell it honestly. I keep a wooden horse in a drawer that has never opened itself. It is not the house's. I carved it badly. The varnish is uneven. I take it out sometimes and set it on the windowsill to look at the street. It looks pleased by cars. When I wake at 3:12, and sometimes I do, because the body is a calendar, I listen to the hallway breathe. I tell the door its hinges are doing fine. I say the names of the people I love in a flat voice that makes nothing of them except fact. I open a window in winter so the place can remember that air goes both ways. Houses want you to stay because they are made of staying. Some want you to remember because remembering is how they keep whole. Some want to be told off like dogs, then fed like cats. Some want you. If yours begins to arrange its kindnesses into a net, cut holes in the pattern, laugh on purpose at odd hours, say ugly prayers, eat at the sink, let the neighbors' voices in, make the walls put up with your bad singing, even when you don't sing. If you go by Ashwood Lane, the clapboards will be a new color that isn't new. The couple will smile with tired eyes on their porch and say the work is coming along and the work will never be done. If you go at lemon light, the upstairs window will reflect the sky and then reflect something else and then reflect the sky again. If you look for the toy horse, you won't see it, because you shouldn't, because it will see you first. Houses, remember, they keep what they are given. Don't give yours what you can't stand to have replayed. And if a door opens at 3:12, don't say who's there. Say not tonight. Say it like you mean to live somewhere with ordinary air. Say it again if the house is kind enough to ask nicely. Now, on to the next story. The path to her hut does not appear until you are already walking on it. It is like that with some mistakes. You think you chose the road, but it chose you when you took your first hungry step. I went into the forest because my brother was dying, and the doctors had run out of ways to say no without using the word. I brought the things the old stories say to bring when you seek Baba Yaga: bread, salt, a ribbon, and a question with a price you are willing to pay. I wore boots that remembered other miles. I tied my hair back so the trees would have less to hold. The forest met me like a person who knows your family. It was not friendly. It was not cruel. It was interested. The birches stood like white ribs. The pines leaned into each other to whisper. A crow hopped from branch to branch above me, saying nothing, which is how crows are kind. I walked until the path appeared beneath my feet, like something burnt into the earth a long time ago. It wound toward a smell you can only call old. Smoke, iron, mushrooms, the crispness of winter that's waiting at the edge of summer. I knew I had arrived when the fence greeted me. It is polite to say the fence is made of bones. It is more accurate to say the fence is made of warnings. They glowed faintly as if they remembered the argument. Beyond the fence, the hut stood on its chicken legs, half asleep, one talon scratching idly at the earth. The door faced away from me because that is how doors are when you don't deserve them yet. I placed the bread on the ground and the salt on the bread. I tied the ribbon to the lowest rung of the gate and spoke the rhyme every child in our village knows, but only fools or desperate people try on a real hinge. Fence, turn your teeth to the forest and your back to me, I said. The fence sighed like an old woman rising from a chair and rotated with the resigned delicacy of machinery that knows it will outlast you. The gate opened. The hut's door angled an ear, listening. I took one step, then two, then stopped because stories say you must never go farther than the house wants you to. Baba Yaga, I called. Voice steady the way you make it when your heart is trying to climb a ladder with no rungs. I have brought bread and salt. The door opened a crack. Heat washed out, along with the smell of something simmering that might have been soup and might have been a lesson. Bread and salt, said a voice that had taught generations to stand up straighter. And what else? A question, I said. The door opened wider. The hut bent down to make the step more manageable. Chicken legs can be considerate when well fed. Inside, the ceiling sloped low, as if to remind you to bow your head. Herbs hung in bunches like children holding hands. A stove breathed. In a chair carved from a log sat the old woman herself, small and huge, bony and plush, beautiful and terrible, the way winter looks from the right window. Speak it, she said, picking at her teeth with a finger bone that might once have belonged to a saint or a thief. My brother is dying, I said. He is young and kind, and his life has not had enough time to make its own mistakes yet. I want him to live. She nodded as if I had ordered a soup she liked to make. And the price? I had rehearsed brave things, my hair, my hands, my shadow, but when I opened my mouth, what came out was truer. Take my luck, I said. All of it. The old woman laughed, delighted. Luck is a petty coin, she said. It pays for nothing you actually want and buys you everything you don't. Keep your luck. Give me something you cannot measure. My voice? I asked, afraid then, because I am a person who speaks to earn rent. Words are a renewable resource, she said. Come now, don't insult me with thrift. What do you want? I asked, and the hut leaned in, and the fence settled, and the crow on the roof cocked his head to better hear the shape of my refusal. Your certainty, she said, all of it, the dull, heavy thing that lets you sleep. the ugly little engine that tells you tomorrow will mostly resemble today because it is polite to do so. I half laughed, half cried. That's not a thing, I said. It is, she said. It's the only thing worth anything. You will wake and not know if the floor remembers the weight of you, if water plans to be wet, if doors still choose open over shut. You will be a guest in every hour, and you will not know the etiquette. If I give it, I asked, will he live? She shrugged in the exact way my grandmother used to, full of God and honestly who knows. He will live as long as lives live when nothing interferes with them, she said, which is to say, long enough to make his own mistakes in his own voice, and perhaps to see winter be beautiful from the right window. I looked at the bread and salt in my hands, and then at my hands, and then at the old woman, and realized that bargains are just mirrors placed cleverly. Take it, I said. Baba Yaga smiled like a gate opening. Sit, she said, and when I did, she placed 2 fingers against my forehead. She didn't take it like an extraction. She invited it out the way. A nurse invites a splinter. It hurt and didn't. It felt like stepping from a train platform onto a train that had not yet decided whether it exists. It felt like learning to pronounce a word that never stays still long enough to keep its vowels. When she removed her hand, the room brightened and dimmed in the same motion. My eyes took 2 steps to find the wall. Go home, she said. Carry bread back. Feed your brother. He will be hungry after life returns to him. What do I owe? I asked, because my mother raised me to write thank you notes. You already paid, she said, and the fondness in her voice was almost cruel. Now go before the hut decides to nap. Outside, the forest was less a place and more a suggestion. The path led me and did not. The fence rotated back to show its teeth to me, which is neighborly if you think about it. The crow flew ahead and then behind, and then sat on my shoulder briefly to remind me that I now belonged equally to before and after. I made it home by remembering and forgetting at the same time. The house was a question mark when I reached it. The door felt surprised to see me. My brother lay in his bed, breathing like he was trying it for the first time. He woke at dusk, hungry as promised. He ate bread and salt and soup and the rest of a chicken he apologized to with every bite. He slept like a new road, straight, with a little curve in exactly the right place. I went to pour water and watched it hang between pitcher and glass for a long, thoughtful moment before deciding to fall. The floor and I negotiated. Stairs introduced themselves at the top and were new at the bottom. I laughed and cried, and laughed again, because anxiety is just awe wearing yesterday's hat. Days became possible in a sequence that refused to admit it was a sequence. Good. Let them refuse. My brother grew, then went back to the work of living. He asked me what had happened. I told him, a hut, a fence, a woman who knew where to put her teeth. He believed me because certainty had leaked from our rooms and left space for belief. Twice a month I go back to the forest with bread and salt and a ribbon. Sometimes the path appears under me, sometimes it doesn't, and I end up sitting on a stump talking to a mushroom that looks like a chair. On the days I find her, Baba Yaga feeds me soup that tastes like remembering the name of the first person who made you laugh. We talk about crows. I bring her stories that don't end. She likes those best. Once I asked her if certainty ever grows back. She shook her head. If it did, you'd only spend it again, she said. Better to learn how to live without it. How? I asked. She gestured at the door that hadn't been there a moment ago, and was now the only door in the world. Bread and salt, she said, and the grace to let water decide. At night, when the house tilts like a boat deciding which river to choose, I put my feet on the floor and thank it for its service. When the coffee hangs in the air thinking it might want to be rain, I wait and say, as you like. When my brother laughs in the next room, it sounds like a small god inventing morning. I don't know if it will continue. I don't need to. If you go to her, don't bring luck. It is a petty coin. Bring a price you can feel leaving. Bring a question that is not a command. And when she asks for something you thought wasn't a thing, say yes if you can. You might learn how to be a guest in your own life, in a way that makes every hour set a plate for you. The path won't show until you're on it. That's the trick and the blessing. Walk anyway. The forest knows your family, and if the floor forgets you, introduce yourself again kindly until it remembers your weight. Now, on to the next story. The first time I heard the song, I thought it was the wind doing what wind does in places that have been emptied of purpose. The old quarry everyone in town called the Hollow had been shut for decades, a bite taken out of the hill and never chewed. I camped there because I was cheap, tired, and too proud to admit the motel's flickering vacancy sign made me nervous in a different way. By day, the hollow looked like ruin with a view. Rusted cables drooped in lazy parabolas. A shattered conveyor belt lay like a peeled road. The pit itself dropped in terraces of stone, the color of old teeth, every ledge filigreed with scrub that had no interest in my opinion. By night, the edges lost their lines. The dark poured down and held still. I ate from a can, read by headlamp, until the words turned into ants, and slept hard enough to forget there was anything to be afraid of. Sometime near midnight, I woke because a voice was humming, not close, not far, the way a refrigerator hums felt before it's heard. It threaded the air with a tune more shape than melody, like the tale of a lullaby after the words fall off. I lay very still and listened to the tent fabric do its small shivers. The hum bent upward and down, then paused on a note that tasted like cold metal. I unzipped the flap an inch. Moonlight lay on the quarry floor in pale ribs. The wind moved in careful hands. Down in the pit, fog had gathered where there had been no fog when I went to sleep. It was not rolling or rising. It was waiting. The tune changed. It tried my name. Not a perfect pronunciation, just the outline of it, like a stranger who has read it once and risks it anyway. My skin lifted as if a temperature had dropped inside me, that the air would get around to later. I closed the flap and told myself that sleep folds strange sounds into the shape of whatever you fear most. The second night, in a motel 20 miles away, the vent above the bed hummed the same melody. A woman's voice, high and even, like a mother who has rehearsed calm. When she reached the place where the note bent down, the vent breathed my name correctly. The TV volume didn't help, neither did running the sink. In the morning, I put my coffee down untouched and asked the waitress if anyone had ever complained about a noise from the hollow. She went still, in the kind of way you see around grief. "Don't go back," she said, not unkindly. I wasn't planning to. She looked at me the way my fifth-grade teacher did when I said I hadn't eaten the paste. It remembers who listens. The third night, I sat where the pit's lip turned to shale, and the wind had to decide whether to go on or circle back. Fog moved below, as if someone were stirring something heavy with a spoon too long. The song began as if it had been playing and only now decided to include me, soft, patient, expectant. When it tried my name, it didn't try. It knew. "What do you want?" I asked, because questions buy time. The fog took on the suggestion of bodies, thin as pencil lines. Dozens, maybe more. They swayed gently, like reeds that have learned sorrow. The humming multiplied, harmonies arriving and leaving with the unison of a tide. The tune was older than the quarry and younger than the rock. "Come down," said my own voice from inside the song. Not an echo, a perfect mimicry. I stood. I didn't mean to. The body answers music with movement. Gravel shifted under my boots. The descent toward the service road suddenly looked reasonable, like stairs you just hadn't seen before. I took one step because one step is how falling introduces itself. A beam of white light slashed the fog. A truck's horn startled the hill. The foreman of the road crew, who'd been regrading the county line, leaned out his window, face creased with a kind of anger that has fear woven in. "Not tonight," he called, as if he knew the schedule. I blinked. The shapes below softened back into fog. The song dropped to a hum that felt like a room clearing its throat. "Not tonight," I said back, to the pit or myself. I went home by a route my GPS didn't recognize until it did. After that, it stopped being nightly. It started being everywhere. A kettle reached a boil in my apartment and held the note too long. The elevator in my building found a frequency I hated. A woman on the train hummed under her breath, a melody that made me stand between cars for the rest of the ride. No matter where I went, the same cadence threaded the day. Up, down, hold, my name, a plea that wore politeness like clothes. I avoided sleep and then wanted it desperately. I smiled too wide while people talked. I began to look at storm drains as if they were mouths. The voice in the vent grew bolder. I taped a towel over it, and it hummed through cotton. I put my head under a shower, and it built itself from the water. I asked the town historian, because historians sometimes say the wrong thing and save your life. He used words like scrip and company store and accident, then shifted to softer ones: collapse, widows, unrecovered. He said the pit had a second dig in the 20s, quiet, off the books, below the level where the ledge had broken years earlier. He said they'd chased a vein past where the engineers would sign, and the tunnels got narrow, and the men got small in the dark. He said the company moved the fence and the map and a line item, and then moved away. He said no one ever heard rocks landing when they threw them in to test the depth. He lowered his voice like I might know someone who had never climbed back out. On his desk lay a ledger of names in 2 columns, shifts and Sundays. Pencil thin, some scored, some entirely erased, some smudged like someone had rubbed them and then stopped. He let me read until my eyes blurred. Beside the list, he'd written a single sentence: "What sings down there isn't grief alone." "What else?" I asked. "Hunger," he said, and then he crossed it out with one line, so he could still read it. I stopped going to work. I stopped telling anyone I wasn't. Sleep slid out from under me. I found myself standing by the sink at 4 a.m., holding a glass as if I had always held it. The tune had become a presence that didn't need sound. I heard it in my molars. I felt it in my wrists. My body tuned itself to a pitch the world didn't share. The 4th night on the rim, I brought earplugs, then didn't put them in because I was honest enough to know they only stop air. The fog below had thinned into columns, like pillars in an old knife. It was quiet, too quiet, the held breath silence of a stage before the actor walks on. I said, "What happens if I do?" The song answered by adding a second voice, low and familiar. My father's from the kitchen at 2 a.m. after the funeral. He hummed when he washed the last dish. He hummed when he couldn't say my name without breaking it. He hummed the same rise and fall, not because he'd known it then, but because the hollow did now, and lent it to him retroactively, because time makes poor fences once you agree to it. Rage is a good rope. I grabbed it. "You don't get to use him," I said, and the fog pulsed as if insulted, then smoothed, then brightened faintly from within. A shape resolved near the bottom of the shaft. Small. A child, hand to mouth, shushing me. Above her, a woman swayed with a bundle in her arms that might have been water, might have been a blanket, might have been a baby. Around them, lines of men in canvas coats leaned on tools. They were still as photographs, and yet they were moving, a posture learned when a voice is near you. "Want to honor." "What are you?" I asked. The answer reached my chest without touching my ears. "Not one, many, not dead, not only. Do you want me? We want what listens. Why me? You stayed. I did. Not at the rim. I'd run. But everywhere else, in the vent, at the sink, on trains, in doorways. I had made space for the song in hours where memory should live. What happens if I go down? The child raised both hands in a pantomime of lifting. The hummed melody found a note halfway between welcome and warning. The fog took on the suggestion of walls. The pit felt narrower. Say I did, I said, bitter now. Say I step, say I slip, say you sing me into a path I can't see, and I crawl on my knees so my hands can learn the turns by how the stone jogs at the seam. Say I reach you. What then? The song softened around my name in a way that hurt. Stay. And if I don't, we will sing from where you sleep. Thunder rolled far off, not from clouds, but from the spine of the hill. A rock loosened and fell. It took a long time to become smaller. I didn't hear it land. The road foreman found me crouched by the pit at dawn and squatted the way men do when they would like to offer you dignity. He lit a cigarette and let it burn in his hand. My grandfather, he said, after the silence had become something you could stand on, is just a shift. Long time ago, the old men still spit when they say it. He came home with white in his hair and red in his eyes. He woke up nights and said there was a fine sound under his feet, sweeter than a fiddle, and if he could only get back to it, he would be righteous in the morning. What happened? Nothing for a while, which was the problem. He was no good at anything but being near the edge. Then one June he walked back. Folks watched him go and practiced the story of how they tried to stop him. He didn't fall. The foreman pinched ash into a small, neat pile on the gravel. Not exactly. What do you do when you hear it? I asked. Pour coffee, he said. Walk away from anything that rhymes. Don't hum to yourself, not even happy. A song's a hook looking for a jaw. I laughed, then cried, which are the same motion with different names. I think it likes me. It does, he said kindly and without comfort. It likes everyone it can make a chord from. For days I practiced forgetting. I slept with a loud fan. I left the TV on an infomercial at volume 3. I practiced speaking aloud to my plants in ways that did not sound like a tune. When the vents sighed, I put on rain sounds and refused to notice if they found a key. I walked city blocks that had corners. I stood in crowded places and let other people's noises press in. The song learned my schedule and went looking for paces I had not worn yet. It found the laundromat at 3 a.m., where machines do a kind of whale song if you let them. It found a stairwell that multiplied footsteps. It found the second stall in the bathroom at work, where a crack in the tile made a reed sound when the door closed. It is hard to unteach your ears. It is harder to take the voice in your head that says this is for you and tell it, not tonight, and then not tomorrow, and then not again until tomorrow grows a rind. The last time I went to the hollow, the air over the pit was very clear, the way air gets after a storm chooses elsewhere. No fog, no suggestion of bodies, no sound. The quiet was bigger than my name. I sat and hung my legs over the drop like an idiot at a swimming hole. I spoke in prose. I recited recipes. I said the alphabet in threes. I told the quarry the names of my teachers in order. I told it the worst and smallest things I'd done, the petty meannesses that collect like grit in the bends of a life. I did not sing. At sunset, when the sky went bruise-colored and the first bat practiced the shape of a turn, a note rose from below like a hand. It was wrong, off by a hair. I didn't look down. I stood and stepped back, and then back again. I didn't run, because running is a rhythm, and rhythms are roads. I moved to a place with traffic and bad saxophone on subways, and neighbors who play two-note doorbells. I kept my windows open so the street could fill me. I learned other sounds. I hummed nothing. I listened to talk radio, to sports, to my idiot upstairs neighbor who screams laughing at 2 a.m. My father's voice stayed where it belongs now, on the other end of a saved voicemail I won't delete. When the kettle catches a certain pitch, I lift it off, let it cool, and set it back down sideways so it will remember to be water. Sometimes, in the middle of a crowded day, a truck backing up will hit the interval just right, and my mind will walk to the edge. Sometimes I wake and hear the vent breathe one note too long, and I put my palm flat to the wall and tell it a list of groceries until the list runs out of tune. Sometimes I hear my name from a mouth in a room I'm not in, and I say, "Not tonight." The hollow is a place where stone remembers a choir. It is also a habit in the body. It will be, forever, one of the ways I could end. I think of the child who raised her hands. I think of the foreman's grandfather, righteous in the morning he never reached. If you camp near a pit people call by a proper noun, be suspicious of your bargains. If a song finds you, give it a shape with a door and get out of the room. Do not go to vents. Do not test wells. Do not practice humming. When it uses your father's voice, don't answer. When it learns yours, teach it boredom. When the wind is only wind, think it aloud, badly and flat. Make your voice a dull instrument. Hang on to ugly noise. Stay where corners keep their promises. And if you ever stand at the lip of a perfectly quiet hole, and it calls you by name, say what the road crew says. Not tonight. Say it until the hill forgets you. Then go home by a way you have to count. Now, on to the next story. The trouble didn't start when the hospital closed. It started when we pretended it was gone. Ashford sat on its hill like a red brick scab the town couldn't stop picking. 20 years of weather had gnawed the cornice, vines pulled at the lintels, windows gaped with black squares where glass used to be teeth. Still, the building kept its posture, chin up, listening. Teenagers dared each other through the front doors. Ghost hunter channels climbed the stairwells for clicks. We told each other the place was basically a ruin, which is something people say when they want a thing to stop having obligations. I'm a paramedic. Buildings that refuse to be finished are my workplace. You learn their moods the way you learn families. Which door sticks, which elevator lies, which hallway collects the fights. But a building isn't supposed to watch you back. You're not supposed to feel the light in a broken window tilt to follow you as you cross a parking lot. The first Ashford patient we got in the ER made it hard to keep performing indifference. He came barefoot through the automatic doors at 2 in the morning on a police escort, clothes torn, soles shredded by glass. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't high. He smelled like wet plaster and the inside of a pipe. He hugged his head as if he could make his skull one size smaller. "Don't let the windows see me," he told me when I knelt by the gurney. He wouldn't let me shine my light in his eyes. He flinched from the stainless panel on the cabinet. He turned the monitor screen away from himself with a frantic hand. "Cover them. Everything that can see you back." The attending ordered a sedative. Tamsin, the triage nurse, the one who keeps a spare banana in her pocket and hands me crackers when my blood sugar forgets to exist, stepped in with the syringe. The man looked straight at her and smiled with too many teeth for the rest of him. "They already marked you," he whispered. "It's too late. You looked." She flinched. He couldn't have known she'd gone to Ashford the week before with her boyfriend and 2 of his idiot friends to film some urbex, as if the word could make a century behave. I only knew because she'd laughed about graffiti, helped me written upside down, while we restocked oxygen. The sedative took him down. We tucked sheets over his cut feet and told the chart a polite lie. Agitated, likely intoxication. Observe. 2 days later, Tamsin's husband found her at dawn, sitting on the sofa with both hands in her lap, staring at the black TV. Her eyes were wide enough to sting. She didn't blink when he said her name. When he switched the TV on, she flinched so hard she bit her tongue and started to cry without making a sound. They admitted her to psych, EEG normal, MRI clean. The note in the chart said, catatonia with a question mark, because charts like punctuation when certainty is expensive. The roomer in the break room said it out loud. Ashford followed her home. A week later, we hauled in a college kid who'd gone in with friends. They said he'd paused at the second floor bathroom mirror as a joke, then wouldn't stop looking. By the time they dragged him out, his palms were bloody from trying to scrape his own cheeks, as if his face were something stuck on wrong. He sobbed in our rig so hard he couldn't breathe. I bagged him gently and murmured like you do to a panicked horse. He choked out. He smiled first. I tried not to. It made me. That should have been enough to keep me away. But paramedics are bad at believing other people's lessons. We need to touch the stove ourselves. It was my partner who pushed. Dan chews gum like it owes him money, keeps his boots polished for luck, and thinks superstition should be paid in mockery, not reverence. Black mold, he said, when the third Ashford-adjacent call came in, and the plasma screens threw our faces back at us, a half-second slow. Snaky whatever, spores mess with your head. You think mold makes mirrors lie? I asked. I think mold makes people sick. Sick people interpret the world with whatever stories they preloaded. He flicked his gum into the trash with the cheerful spite of a man who has been wrong often and hates to add to the count. Off shift tomorrow, 30 minutes. N95s. We sniff and go. There are 1,000 places I won't follow a friend off duty. Bathrooms and bars, living rooms with men who say they don't need help and keep their fists in their pockets. The hill. I meant to say no. Then I thought about Tamsin's wide eyes. I thought about the barefoot man's teeth. I said fine, and hated the part of me that can't leave a bandage unlifted. We parked by the rusted gate just before midnight. The moon looked like a peeled egg someone had held in a hand too long. Our flashlights cut cones through a smell like pennies and rain. The front door lay on its side like a tongue. We stepped over it. The lobby tile cracked under our boots. Graffiti shouted the vocabulary of 16. Help me kill her inside. A wonky pentagram layered until yesterday's jokes turned into a sediment of old fear. We swept the first corridor, patient room doors with narrow wired windows. Our lights stuttered our forms across the glass. Two tall shapes, masks on. I forced myself to keep my light on the floor because floors tell the truth about the day. See? Dan said, trying briskness. Mold and kids. Smell? I asked. We both sniffed like dogs. The air tasted metallic, a battery on a tongue. Mold threaded through. Sure, but not the headline. Halfway down the hall, he stopped. Hold up. My body recognized his tone before my brain did. I felt the small muscle under my eye start its private idiot tick. He raised his light at the nearest door's wired window. Two figures stood in the reflection. Me and Dan, except my reflected face wasn't moving. Not the eyelids, not the throat. When I lifted my hand slow to prove something stupid to myself, the woman in the glass stayed very still and watched me with interest. Dan's reflection tilted its head like a dog hearing a new word. Dan had not moved. We backed up in even steps. The figures in the next two windows pressed their palms to the glass with a soft, thick thud. Our hands stayed where we'd put them. In the third window, my reflected mouth twitched up, small and private, at something no one had said. We took the stairwell door at a trot that didn't look like fleeing, because pride is a habit you can do in PPE. The stairwell breathed cold. Every landing had a wired glass window. Every window had a face pressed to it. Some of those faces were ours, multiplied and scaled wrong like a child's collage. Some belonged to people I knew and didn't. Tamsin, the barefoot man, a boy who died in July with a pit bull whining at the curb. Every face wore an expression slightly out of time. On the third landing, a mouth opened, as if to ask me to hold something. I did not stop. The basement door stuck and then took offense. We slipped through into air that tasted like burned sugar and batteries. Mirrors lined the walls, standing, leaning, stacked in a jittery circle like teeth. Some wore ornate frames with the silver gone to cloud at the edges. Some were cheap rectangles with the safety film bubbled. Some were wardrobe doors that remembered shoulders. They faced inward, angled to catch a center point. Something stood at that point. I wish I could tell you it looked like a man. It didn't. It looked like the part of a mirror that refuses to be glass. A tall, narrow disobedience. Faces skinned across it. A deck riffling. Mine, Dan's, Tamsin's, the barefoot man's, the college kid. The mouth of each face was wrong. When mine surfaced, she smiled too soon. The mirrors in the circle shivered delicately. A dog's ears at a whistle. The thing lifted an arm and pointed. Its arm didn't have joints. It simply bent. We ran. There are choices you get to congratulate yourself for later. This wasn't one. This was the body choosing self over pride, and I led it back up the stairs between windows that tried to be eyes, through the lobby, over the tongue of the door, into night with our lungs on fire. In the passenger mirror of the rig, Dan's reflection smiled when he didn't. In the driver's side mirror, the version of me there breathed easier than I did, like she'd already finished something important and wouldn't share. We didn't file a report. You can't write something wore my face and tested the grin in the same field where you enter transported without incident. We didn't tell the charge nurse, or the cops we like, or each other. Not really. We did what night people do, rearranged small habits and pretended that was control. I taped a rag over the microwave door at the station. I put gaffer's tape over the shiny logo on my watch. Dan stopped wearing mirrored sunglasses. He turned the bathroom mirror to face the wall, like he was disciplining a child. We learned to look down. For a week, the town let us get away with it. Then we got sent to a domestic 2 blocks from the hill. The woman met us on the sidewalk, hugging herself so tightly, her sternum might have hummed. "He won't stop smiling," she said, as if describing a small leak. "He won't stop." Her husband stood in the kitchen with his back to us, facing the sliding glass door. His reflection in it, narrower, slicker, grinned at him. His jaw shook with the effort of not matching. I walked sideways so he had to look at me, not the glass. "Hey," I said, "that tone you learn for men who are losing to an enemy you can't tackle. Look at my nose, not past me, at me." He tried. He accidentally caught the stainless of the fridge. He smiled so hard I thought his lips would rip. We covered the door with a blanket on our way out. We got him to the rig without letting him glance in the rear window. We buckled him and breathed with him until his body remembered the trick, the way a drowned man remembers swimming. He calmed. My hand shook only afterward, when I had no more job to do. That night, because apparently I don't like myself, I drove past Ashford with the windows up and the radio off. Air from the hill tasted like pennies and old rain. The black windows shone like eyes that had learned not to blink. I parked at the bottom of the fence line and looked straight at the ground and still somehow knew the front door lay on its side, with its hinges still trying to finish their last argument. Back home at 3, my bathroom sink turned on by itself to a thread. In the mirror above it, condensation bloomed, where a face would be if I stood there. Letters followed, traced by a finger from the other side. "Don't let the windows see me." The apostrophe was missing, like a small politeness left out in a hurry. I turned the tap off so slowly, the mirror didn't think I was refusing. I hung a towel over it and slept badly on top of the covers. For 6 days we stayed polite, and the town walked past the hill with its eyes on its shoes. Then Dan texted me a photo of his bathroom mirror, papered over with brown packing tape. "Good," I replied, and meant it. He sent a second photo. The paper had puffed inward like something behind it had exhaled. He wrote, "Ha." I wrote back a list. "No joking. Keep lights off after midnight. Don't stand where screens can catch you." And he sent only, "K." He was late the next morning. He never texts when he's actually in trouble. He only texts jokes. I went to his building and knocked the rhythm that means, "Hey, it's me." He opened the door on the chain. He looked present and not. He asked, "Do I look weird?" like a child asking if a lie shows. You look like a man who needs coffee, I said. He smiled by accident. The brass of the door kept the smile like a smear. I unhooked the chain without asking and went straight to the bathroom. The paper bowed like a sail, then flattened. I peeled a corner. In the fog trapped under the tape, someone had drawn a tidy grin with two neat teeth. We worked. We didn't go back to the hill together. We told ourselves that was restraint when it was really fatigue. Tamsin started to blink again. She kept a sheet over her TV. She avoided the black of her phone screen when it was idle. When I caught her reflection in the microwave, it waved before she did. She laughed once, the sound a person makes when a joke touches bone. Then I did the thing no one had asked for. I went back to Ashford alone. I brought a face shield, not for droplets, for glass. I wrapped my phone in gaffer's tape so it would be a brick and not a lake. I wore a watch with a scratched plastic crystal that refused to reflect. I kept my light on the floor, except when the stairs demanded respect. I talked to the building because I am the kind of person who talks to dogs, cars, and rooms. Just me, I said, stepping over the door's tongue. Small business. The stairwell windows were empty. That was worse somehow. The basement door yielded like a tooth you shouldn't have wiggled. Down there the circle remained, but with a gap in the far wall where mirrors had been. Someone had moved them. Where? Who sells old mirrors by the pound? Why did the thought of them standing in somebody's antique booth make my stomach go hard? The center held the tall wrongness. Faces slid across it like cards. I saw mine older by 30 years. Mouth careful, eyes practical. I saw Dan trying not to grin. I saw Tamsin, hair unbrushed, furious at being looked at. The thing rotated its faces with patience. It didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. Hey, I said, because if you're going to be foolish, be polite. You don't get them, you hear me? You don't get my people. The mirrors shivered. The thing tilted. Behind me, at the door, something at floor height dragged one not hand across the threshold. The glass nearest the door leaned in, as if to listen. I stepped around the circle, away from the center. I put both palms against the nearest mirror. The glass was cool, then cold, then warm, the way a hand finds your temperature and tries to keep it. I talked to it the way I talk to a patient's child. Your job is to give people back what the day takes. Haircuts, ties, lipstick, who we are when we have to leave the house. Not this, not doors. The mirror hummed, old TV hum, the kind I could hear as a kid even when my parents thought the set was off. The surface steadied. The woman in the glass matched my breath again, not ahead of me, not with a borrowed mouth. I moved to the next mirror. Palms, talk, third, fourth. The oval with the ornate frame was most stubborn. It kept trying to paste Dan's mouth on my face. I pressed until my wrists ached and told it the list of what my hands have fixed. A kid choking on a grape, a bleeding man lowered gently so his mother wouldn't hear him hit, a prom dress hemmed over a bathtub while someone cried into a towel because she wanted to look like herself and not the idea she'd bought. The oval warmed and yielded my face back to me. I didn't finish the circle. Holiness is above my pay grade, but I spoke to enough surfaces that the room changed shape. The pressure eased, the way a bar quiets when one voice starts a story everyone needs to hear. The thing in the center dragged my face up again and made it grin like it knew something final. I didn't let it keep the moment. I turned my back on it. Movies tell you never to do that. Movies were filmed by people who adore looking. I faced the circle instead. You know your job, I told the glass. Do that. If something tells you you're a door, make it say please. If it can't, be a wall. The shape by the door skittered out. The wrongness at the center hissed. A sound like air abandoning a room. I left before the building remembered my name. I won't pretend I cured anything. People still come in shaking from the hill. The town pulls dumped mirrors out of the ravine like fish, and stacks them at the transfer station. Thrift stores have stopped pretending they ever get decent wardrobe doors. Tamsin keeps a sheet over her TV and a hand over the camera on her laptop, and when her reflection waves first, she waves back, small, as if humoring an anxious child. Dan took the paper off his mirror and texted me a picture of a blank tile wall, with the caption it blinked first. I've stopped lecturing my friends. I talk to surfaces instead. I cover the bathroom mirror after midnight. I keep the rig side mirrors aimed at the ground, unless I'm merging, and when I must look, I say aloud, "Give me what I need, not what you want." The black of my phone screen shows only my thumbprint smears. If it ever shows my mouth when my mouth isn't doing anything, I put it face down. Some mornings I forget to uncover the mirror on my dresser before I leave for shift. I come home and the towel is slightly askew, lifted by a finger whip. I smooth it flat. The glass feels cool under the cotton, as if someone on the other side is learning manners. I tell it the names of the people who need it. Kids with bobby pins in their teeth, old men trying to tie a tie again after a funeral, a woman who wants to see whether her hands make her look like her mother's hands yet. I tell it they matter more than whatever the hill thinks it is owed. When night presses its mouth to the window and asks for a smile, I let it fog the glass. The fog outlines an oval. I don't trace it. I stand there with my hands open, and when the fog clears and the glass remembers the streetlight and the opposite brick and my face, I say good, because sometimes approval is the only prayer that does any work. If you ask me whether Ashford is haunted, I'll say it's habitual. The town looked at the hill for too long, and the hill learned to look back. Mirrors are obedient. They were happy to help. The trick isn't to destroy them, it's to give them better instructions. We still carry people out who can't stop smiling. We still cover sliding doors with blankets on our way past. We still breathe with men until their chests remember to lift by themselves. On a good night, you can watch someone glance at a black surface and then decide not to, and that tiny act of refusal feels like a hinge choosing to stay a hinge. On a bad night, I wake, and the bathroom sink is running again, a slender thread like a vein. The towel over the mirror has slipped. In the corner of the damp glass, two careful teeth appear in a neat little grin. I wipe them away with the side of my hand and go back to bed. In the morning, the glass shows me as I am, sleep-creased, competent, uninteresting, alive. I run a thumb along the line of my jaw in the reflection, and the woman there matches me, on time without expectation. The window behind her shows the river and a cloud, no extra faces, no borrowed smiles. If the hill wants more than that, it can wait for another town to forget a building. We're busy. We have real people to look after. Now, on to the next story. They told us not to take the old road through the pines, not because of potholes or ice, but because of the things that walked there when the moon was fat. I laughed when I heard it. I had just moved to the valley, renting a cabin on the cheap while I tried to restart my life. Divorce, layoffs, the usual collapse when everything falls apart at once. You look for quiet. The cabin was cheap because the locals said the road cursed the whole ridge. They swore that people went missing, that livestock turned up torn in ways no coyote could manage, that some nights you heard howling that wasn't quite animal. Of course I thought it was folklore. I thought every small town needed its monster. That was before I learned what walked between the trees. The first week was uneventful. The cabin had its quirks, pipes that moaned, windows that didn't quite fit their frames, but nothing sinister. I bought groceries in town, smiled politely at the old-timers who muttered warnings, and spent nights reading by the fireplace. The silence felt heavy, but after city noise, I welcomed it. Then came the first full moon. I was chopping wood out back when I noticed the forest had gone still. No wind in the branches, no birds. Even the creek down the slope sounded muffled. I told myself I was imagining it, but my hands were sweating. Then came the sound, a long, drawn-out howl that rose and cracked like a human voice carried too far. It wasn't a wolf. I'd heard wolves in documentaries, in zoos. This howl had a shape, something deliberate in its tone, as if it wasn't announcing itself but asking. I froze, axe raised, heart beating too loud. Then it stopped. The woods remained silent, but I swore something out there was listening for me. That night, I barred the cabin door and kept the fire stoked. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the porch. Heavy, two-legged, I crept to the window, pulled the curtain just an inch. Moonlight fell across the yard, and there, moving between shadows, was a figure. Tall, wrong, its body hunched, covered in coarse hair that bristled silver in the light. Its arms were too long, ending in claws that scraped wood. The head, God, the head was caught between shapes. Muzzle stretching like an animal's, but eyes that gleamed with a knowing hunger. It sniffed the door, snarled, and then it whispered, my name. I staggered back, nearly knocking over the lamp. How could it know my name? No one in town had called to me like that, not even my ex on the phone. The voice was ragged, torn between growl and speech, but it was mine. The thing circled the cabin. The windows rattled as it pressed its weight against them, testing. I shoved furniture against the door, every muscle shaking. The fire popped and hissed, and each sound felt like it gave me away. Then, just before dawn, silence. I didn't sleep. The next day, I drove into town. The locals looked at me like they already knew. At the diner, I finally asked, what's on the old road? The waitress, white hair, hands that shook, set down my coffee and said, not what, who? She told me about the legend. Decades back, a logging crew tried to cut too deep into the ridge. Something killed them. Their bodies were found shredded, faces twisted in terror. Since then, every few years, people vanished under a full moon. Some said it was a curse. Others said it was the ridge reclaiming what was stolen. But the oldest stories said a man made a bargain out there, traded his soul for strength, and the price was eternal hunger. They wear faces, she whispered, sometimes voices. Don't answer if it calls to you. Packed up, cut my losses. But some part of me needed to know if it was real, if the thing that spoke my name was just a dream born from loneliness. This time, I prepared, boarded the windows, kept the rifle close, lit every lamp I had. At midnight, the howling came again, louder, closer, then knocking, not claws, knuckles, 3 deliberate raps at the door. Let me in. My blood froze. The voice was my ex-wife's. I gripped the rifle, teeth clenched. You're not her, I said, though my voice shook. Please, it begged, breaking into sobs that were hers, perfectly hers. It's so cold out here. Just open the door, please. The door creaked under pressure. The boards groaned. I aimed the rifle and fired a shot through the wood. A scream erupted, not human, not animal. Something caught between. The boards held. Then came the sound of retreat, claws scratching wood as it leapt from the porch. The next morning, bloody claw marks scarred the door, and in the yard, pressed into the mud, were footprints, bare, human. I couldn't stay. I packed what I could, loaded the truck, and started down the old road. The forest pressed close. Every curve felt like it was hiding something just beyond the tree line. I kept the gun on the seat beside me, eyes darting. Halfway down the ridge, the radio crackled to life. I hadn't turned it on. Static. Then my son's voice. Dad? I slammed the brakes, breath choking me. My son hadn't spoken to me in months, not since the divorce. His voice was younger though, softer. Dad, come get me, please. The radio hissed, then laughter, low, hungry. I threw the truck into gear and sped the rest of the way down, refusing to look at the mirrors. I never went back to the cabin, never set foot on the old road again. But some nights when the moon is high, I hear it outside my new apartment, on the fire escape, claws scraping metal, and always it whispers my name. Now, on to the next story. The sign above the door still said WRX 1310 AM, but the bulbs behind the letters were half dead, so most nights it read something closer to WRX. The X felt appropriate. It sounded like a kiss and a warning, and the shape a map uses when it wants you to turn around. I took the night shift for the same reason people take night shifts in places like this, because no one else wanted it, and because the money wasn't good enough to be anyone's first choice. The station sits where the city gets thin and the river fattens up. Old warehouses with their windows bricked in, a handful of tire shops, a diner with a neon coffee cup whose steam pulses in slow red breaths. When the sun is up, the whole block smells like hot rubber and old oil. When the sun's down, it smells like a motel room that forgot who stayed there last. Board op, voice, light maintenance, the station manager told me. Her office had 2 desks, one for payroll and one for the cat. The cat chose mine. Midnight to 6. Keep the logs clean. The tower hums in a big storm. Don't panic. We've got a generator, but the switch is sticky. Kick it. Any callers? I asked because I was not a child and knew what dead stations feel like in the bones. You'll get some, she said. Old people who forget to sleep. 3rd shift nurses, the man who makes breakfast for snowplow crews when it snows. They'll keep you company. And requests? She smirked like a lint roller. Darling, you don't have the licenses for much of that anymore. But sure, if they ask for Patsy Cline, slide on a cover so the big boys don't bite. Talk a lot, it's cheap. Rocks used to be a local legend. Before my time, and my father's barely. A baritone with a tasteful mustache kept half the valley alive through layoffs and ice storms. The station's photo wall still held his framed headshot. Part newsman, part Friday night dad. Then the company in another state bought the licenses and split the day in leases, syndicated chatter, daytime sports, religious hour with a preacher whose voice sounded like a shoe polishing itself. Night was junk shop time. Night was me. The booth was small, God's own aquarium, if God had bad tastes. Brown carpet, foam squares on the wall gone the color of tea. A console older than my first crush, the board patched with tape where mic 1 used to be and where phones sometimes pretended. A window looked into the bullpen that no shows used anymore. Beyond that, a hallway with framed black and white photos from the station's good years, and a door that stuck in humidity. A sign over the hallway switch, "Do not turn off the red light, under any circumstances." The red light hung over the outside door like a drunk moon, and burned whenever we broadcast. It meant on air to anyone who knew. It meant something else to me by the second week. I started the way you start in a haunted house, by pretending you're the one doing the haunting. "Good midnight, Valley," I said, my voice lower than it is in my human life. "You're up late with rocks, caffeinate me if you can. Keep me awake if you can't. Nurses, write me. Drivers, honk in a beautiful key when you pass a red light swinging over a tired door." People called. Her name was Dee Dee. She worked laundry at Mercy and wanted something with a backbeat to keep her legs moving. A man I assumed was divorced because of how carefully he didn't mention anyone. Asked for an old love song and then said, "Never mind, I shouldn't." A woman who wouldn't give a name just breathed for a minute and said, "Finally, he's asleep. Can you just talk to me until I'm sure?" I talked. The night talked back. The tower hummed. The first time the phone rang without ringing, I figured the line was dirty. You know the sound old wires make when they realize there is no longer enough world on the other side to carry them properly? That quick, soft chirp like a bird practiced into silence? It did that. The light didn't blink, but the line was there. I punched it because silence is harder to sell than even a bad voice, and said, "Good midnight. Warox?" A woman breathed. She had the careful cadence of a person who practiced being calm when she didn't want to be. It sounded like she was in a closet without room to kneel. "Is it you tonight?" she asked. "Depends," I said, my hand hovering over the pot fader, because I am not a fool. "Who am I supposed to be?" "The one in the glass," she said. "You're new." "Newish," I said, and in the window my face looked like someone I hadn't met yet. "I like the way you keep the levels even," she said. "The last one let the songs hurt. They hurt anyway, you know. You don't have to help." I told her my name, and she took it and rolled it around like a lozenge. "I need you to stay on," she said. "Urgent now. All the way to 6. Don't play whatever he asks you to. He'll call. He always calls when the red light is clean." "The preacher?" I asked, trying a joke to keep my lungs from weeping in public. "No," she said softly. "The other one." A click. The line didn't hang up. It ended, like a half-remembered dream when the cat jumps on your chest. The red light over the back door flickered once. The tower's hum deepened a half-step, as if the weather had decided to harmonize. At 1:17 a.m., the real ring came, BRRNN, like a small bell inside a cereal box. I punched the line and hit the delay because I am a little bit trained. "Good midnight, WRX." Static, then a man's voice, new and old, the way a song sounds when someone presses a warble button. "You're late. Actually on time," I said, glancing at the atomic clock the manager had taped to the wall, with the seriousness of a room where the minute hand used to matter. "You're early," he laughed. "I have heard lovely laughs in my life, and awful ones, and the ones that sound like someone trying on a laugh to see if it fits. This one had a seam. It sounded like a thing once broken and recently set. Play me something," he said, "something with an engine in it." Specific. I scrolled through the library. The legal stuff was thin, the gray stuff was deep. Recordings of local bands that signed away rights for a joke. Tracks from a basement cover act who gave us 3 CDs of Springsteen-ish that wasn't. Backups we didn't deserve to have. My hand hovered over a track titled 3-Lane Mercy and then dragged itself to a stack of PSAs instead. The man hummed behind the static. The red light brightened. "I can talk to you," I said brightly. "I can keep you awake." "I don't sleep," he said without brag. "I prefer to drive." "We love a driver." I flicked all the faders to make noises come and go, because a board in motion is almost music. "What kind of road?" "Empty, wet, no signs." "Ha," I said nervously. "Our valley. The DOT is going to call me if you keep slandering them." He chuckled again. The chuckle had teeth. "A song," he said, bored now. "You'll learn I don't call twice." "Am I learning?" I asked, to cut the fear in two. "What is this, training?" "Apprenticeship," he agreed, "but you don't like that word." A click, not a hang-up. The feeling a night gets when someone leaves the building without opening a door. When I stood at the glass and looked past my face, the bullpen was empty as it had been all night. A chair had shifted slightly, as if someone had gotten up in a hurry to make a point. I put on a weather bed and read the hour pronounced precipitation like it was a guest, added a joke about how no one needs a forecast if they have joints with opinions. Did the thing voices do, or they turn fear into filler? I told myself the delay meant I could stop anything before it slid into the room. I told myself the red light was a kind of spell, a circle the station had drawn for 50 years to convince the dark that it should listen and not eat. At 1:23, the phone chirped without the light again. I hit it. "Wah rocks." "Don't," the woman said. "He makes you talk, and then he makes you play it back to him later, and takes the part he needs." "What part?" I asked. "The part that thinks nothing bad can happen if you keep talking," she said. "I have to go. I'm in the broom closet, and Mrs. Owens just came in for more toilet paper." Click. "Who are you?" I asked an empty line. The red light hummed. The tower responded, like a bridge under too many feet. By 2 a.m., my voice had learned how to put itself in a lower place and stay there. The script in front of me turned to scribbles, the scribbles to words no one wrote. I read copy for a farm implement dealer who had moved his lot 5 years ago and had a name like a man who used to give kids cigars. I read a PSA about a county fair that had burned down before I was born. I read the top of the hour legal ID in a cadence I'd never practiced. This is WRX 1310 AM, bringing you the night the way you ask for it. It felt like reading an oath. At 2:36, the on-air red light outside blinked. One blink. All our gear is old, the manager had said. It drinks power like a teenager, but that blink had timing. It happened exactly when I turned down the bed and left space for a breath. Outside, down the hallway, the door latch sighed, then decided against it. You learn a building's noises fast. Which ones are the compressor, the ice machine trying its best, the raccoon overhead deciding whether to move in? Which ones are the ones that come from inside your head? Hunger noises, exhaustion scraping. The sigh at the latch was neither. It was the sound a door makes when a polite person pretends to knock just by leaning close. The tower hummed the way a person hums to make you forget they have a mouth. I put a CD in and hit play on a jazz thing we did have the paper for because dead men's catalogs are bigger. 2:03, I said, stupidly to the air. If you're crossing the viaduct, watch the black ice near the fourth seam. Yes, the fourth, and don't pretend you don't know what I mean. The chirp. No light. Once, the woman said. Just once, I answered, when he asked my name. He said it back to me like he was making sure it fit. He called me by that name for 50 minutes until the red light went out with the dawn, and then he didn't know me anymore. Please don't say your name again. I have to, I said automatically. It's the law. Not to him, she said, and suddenly she was on 2 lines at once, her voice in the phone and her breath in the window glass. The booth filled with a smell like cold rain on turned dirt. If you feel the need to explain yourself, you are already doing what he wants. Click. I filled between songs like a fireman's arm. The board seemed to know my hand. The little start buttons glowed warm as if my fingers were their plan. My throat went dry, and I drank coffee that had been made in the last administration. My pulse learned the routes of each ad break as if the console had laid them in as paths for animals. At 3, I swore I heard the baritone from the old station Headshot chuckle from the hallway, a friendly sound with one extra tooth in it. PSA from the library, I said, queuing up a recording from whatever era WROX had money for a library. Story hour Saturdays 11 to noon. No unattended children, a reasonable request. The child in the recording laughed on cue, too high. The laugh elongated like tape left on a radiator. The red light outside burned brighter. Call in and tell me about the best, worst road you ever drove, I said, panicking towards Small, because people call up the perfect roads, and those are never true. The chirp again. What's your best, worst road? I asked, ready to hang up if laughter came with seams. County 12, a male voice said flat, before they fixed the shoulder. Ah, I said, because that road eats cars when it has nothing better to do. The place where the crossbuck leans because there's absolutely a train and absolutely no track. Right, he said, and then the voice changed. He said my name, the way a parent does when they're about to ask you to get in the car, because the hospital is where you need to be. Play me something with drums. No, I said, before the part of my brain that does social grease could step in. We've got no license for anything except a sad version of Take 5. Play me the not quite, he said, and the radio's delay light flared and died as if the thing in between me and the air decided it could get there quicker, another way. I put on the PSA again. Remember, I said, my mouth speaking while the rest of me went still. We don't exist without you. If you're drunk, don't drive. If you're lonely, call me. If you're tired, pull over at the diner with the neon cup and tell them W.R. Oaks sent you. They'll give you a refill. Tell them I sent you. The man on the line said in my head, not in my ears, and the red light outside fluttered like breath on glass. I am not brave. I am not a hero in the way stories like to sell hero. I did not recite scripture or salt the threshold. I did what night shift people do. I chose the next small thing I could do and did it stubbornly until it looked like courage. I slid a CD into the disc tray and played 2 minutes of Rain because the station had a local artist who had recorded City at Night with a hand mic and a roof. Then I brought my own mic up and told a story about a night the automatic car wash downtown ate my mother's bumper and the manager apologized with a voucher booklet so fat we washed a car we didn't even own yet. The console's lights looked like a quiet Christmas. The tower hummed to itself, and the hum felt like a dog deciding to lie back down after it has already stood up. At 3:45, the door opened, not the back door, the hallway door, the one I had deadbolted and chain locked out of habit. I heard the chain go tight and stay that way. The door moved about half an inch into the room and held there, polite, while the chain chose its side in a conversation I wasn't invited to. The red light flickered and didn't fail. I tasted pennies. I didn't turn to look. I learned that from an old man in a different city who used to sit up with dying people and said turning toward certain doors makes them wider. I told a different story, this one about a gas station night clerk who used to let me count his packs of Marlboros when I was 9, and he wasn't supposed to let kids in the booth, and he did anyway, and taught me change, which is kindness, no matter what the world says it is. The door eased back and closed. The chain sighed, as if it had been complimented on its figure. It's harder when they're polite, I said into a microphone no one had asked a question into. At 4, the woman called again. It was the real ring this time. You're doing well, she said. He's bored. He's in a car with the windows cracked and the heater making sounds. He wants to drive through the city and listen to the station bleed into another. He wants to catch you as you ghost out. Her breath warmed the glass. Frost formed where she said my name without saying it. Don't say you'll keep him company. I won't, I said. I'll keep other people company, and he can listen to that. Better, she said. Tell them something they can hold on to when the red light goes out. So you're real, I said, because no one should trust untested angels. Not exactly, she said. I'm one of the things that happens when people need to talk into the dark, and the dark needs someone to talk through. We organize ourselves after a while. We hold our own hands. Are you dead? I asked, which is a rude question, and the only one I had strength to carry. I am on the side of the glass that doesn't fog, she said, which is not the same. Why do you care? I asked. Why me? Because your voice is tidy, she said. Tidy, I repeated, offended. It has corners, she said. Things with corners can keep the rain off people. Sometimes you keep the rain off things that do not deserve it. Her tone cooled. You will never play him what he asks for, even when he makes you want to. Promise. I promise, I said, and the room breathed the small sigh of a contract signed. By 5, it felt like the booth and I had become one instrument. The board sliders were a spine. I scratched a note, and the station changed shape. I lied, and the ceiling dipped. I told the truth, and something in the tower straightened. I told listeners about the diner's pot of coffee and about a deer in the median near mile marker 124 that had no interest in learning economics, and about a snowplow driver pulling in behind a school at 5 because a school should look like a promise even when the counties broke. Call me when you get to the light by the pharmacy, I told a nurse from Mercy. There's something about the 6th light on that pole that makes people cry. I'm not saying it will, I'm saying it might. So if it does, you'll know you can blame something that can't be hurt. At 5:30, the storm the station manager had promised rolled its shoulders over the river. The tower hummed in the exact note the red light liked. The generator clicked its tongue at me in the back hall, and I went and kicked it, and it breathed on the third kick. I could feel the man out there in the dark, drowsy with ask, getting nearer because boredom leads men to doors. He didn't knock this time. He waited for the station to ghost out at the top of the hour so he could slip between shows like a teethy eel. I did something the manager would have fired me for if we had this conversation in the morning. At 5:56, I turned off the automation. I killed the next show's stinger. I turned off the legal ID bed. I left the red light burning and the mic up. We don't have anything scheduled. I told the valley we've just got 4 minutes and a room and a sound. I could make a sound, the man said, without calling, without breathing, from a distance that felt too near. You won't, I told him, and then I spoke the only prayer I know that works. Inventory. I told the night what was in my pockets. Keys, too. Receipt for a coffee whose ink had decided not to be useful anymore. A coin from a foreign country I had never visited. A paperclip. Lint. A dried bean. I told the night what was on the board. One dead channel where mic 3 used to be. One half-alive phone. A CD with a play button that had never failed me. I told the night my full name. First, middle, last. Not into the phone or to the man, but to the people in their cars, to the nurse on the verge of the pole that weeps people, to the snowplow driver, to the old man walking his apartment, because every step is a decision and the floor is a map. I told them my name, so that later, if the man called and asked, I could say you missed it. I gave it to someone else. At 5:59:30, I said Wallach's 13:10 a.m. We are still here. At 6:1 the red light went out, not a blink, off. The hum of the tower changed to the low, uninteresting tone of proper business hours. I could feel the man's mouth make a shape of an annoyed smile. The chain on the door lifted itself slightly off the jamb, as if to say, we'll try again tonight. The coffee at the diner across the street pulsed once in its urn and then settled, like a body breathing in sleep. I didn't move. The cat stepped into the booth and rubbed against my shin as if she had come to collect something I had promised. I felt the shape of the night in my throat, how much I had fed it and how much it had tried to take when I was distracted. The phone didn't ring. The delay light lay like a dead eye. The board looked like a cemetery before the gravedigger comes to mind. The flowers. At 6:07, the station manager opened the though-locked hallway door with a trick I had not known existed and said, you look like someone who almost quit. Almost, I said. What's the red light for? She didn't pretend not to know what I meant. It's a promise, she said. We keep it when we can. Who was the last one? I asked. The last night voice. She sighed. You'll see his picture on the wall with the mustache, she said gently. We found him asleep at the board with a song on loop and a ring mark from his coffee, and a smile like a person hearing applause in another room. Dead? I asked, as if dead were worse than what else I could imagine. Rested? She said. Anyway, don't worry. The red light doesn't ask you for anything you don't already want to give, which is the only kind of lie that works. I went home and slept through the day, and woke to a voicemail from the nurse, who cried at the sixth light. She said, you kept me company. The deer was there. I think you saved his life too. Which is funny because I don't think deer have radio. The man didn't call. He doesn't need phones the way we do. He reads schedules. He listens for silence, the way men like me listen for footsteps in hallways. I took the night shift again and again and again, because it turns out I like talking to the valley when it pretends not to listen. It turns out I like being the circle a red light draws. It turns out I like learning the difference between a door being polite and a door being brave. The woman called sometimes not to say anything except keep the levels even, and once to ask if you feel something standing behind you, and it is tall and careful, don't turn, not yet. Give it a small story to hold, something with corners. I do. I tell the towers and the men in cars and the nurses and the tired and the dead and not of the valley small stories with corners. I do not play him the songs he asks for. I play him rain sometimes because rain makes him quiet. I list what is in my pockets. I tell people my name at the top of the hour, where it belongs, so I won't be tempted to squander it later. I keep the red light burning until 6, even when storms kick it and the generator needs 3 kicks back. If you are driving at 1:17 a.m. and you hear a voice that makes you think of dark roads without signs, don't ask him to keep you company. Ask me. If you are in a closet behind a mop and a bucket, call from there. I will listen, and the red light will keep itself brave a little longer. If you have to pull over at the 6th light to cry for no reason, you can write down. Do it. I'll tell you the names of the things in my pockets until you are done. If you are tired, I will list the bridges and the roads that pretend to be straight and warn you about the deer who don't like economics. If a song with an engine keeps catching your ear, hum it, but don't let me hear you. He listens for that. He is always on the line that doesn't blink. When the dawn takes the red light, and I tell the valley the call sign and my full name, and say we are still here, know that I am saying it to the glass too. I am saying it to the door that breathes. I am saying it to the old mustache on the wall, and the cat, and the woman who lives on the breath side of the window, and to the tower that sings when it rains. We are still here, for now. Now, on to the next story. The river at night had a sound all its own, not just water moving, but something deeper, like whispers hidden in the current, rising and falling with every bend. When I was a kid, I used to love it. That rushing noise lulled me to sleep on nights when the windows were open and the summer heat pressed down. But that night, that sound felt different. I had stopped by the bridge out of habit. It was late, and I was driving back from a visit with friends. The highway was faster, sure, but when I wanted quiet, I cut through the back roads along the water. The river ran beside the road for miles, dark and restless, and the bridge was its spine. That night the quiet wasn't comfort. It pressed against the windows of my car, thick and deliberate. The bridge appeared in my headlights, a pale arc of old wooden planks stretched over black water. The wood rattled as my tires touched it, the sound amplified by the stillness around me. Halfway across, I saw her, a figure in white, standing at the far end. Her dress was long, torn at the hem, clinging damply to her legs. Her hair was black and heavy, dripping in loose strands that masked her face. She wasn't moving, just waiting. I slowed. At first I thought she might be someone in trouble. Maybe a drunk wandered too far. Maybe someone had been stranded. But the air in the car shifted, suddenly colder, sharp enough to sting my lungs. My gut told me to keep driving, not to stop, not even to slow down. Her head lifted as my headlights washed over her. Her face was pale as moonlight, her eyes dark and wet. When she opened her mouth, the sound that came out didn't belong to a human throat. It was louder than it should have been, filling the car, the bridge, the night itself. A wail, a scream, grief, rage, hunger, all tangled into one endless sound. I floored the gas. The car jolted across the remaining planks, engine roaring. In the rearview mirror, she was suddenly closer, too close, as if distance didn't matter. Her arms were outstretched, fingers long and thin, reaching for the trunk of my car like she could drag it into the water by sheer will. Then, nothing. The sound stopped. The mirror was empty. I didn't stop driving until the town lights reappeared, and even then, I couldn't stop shaking. 2 days later, I told my grandmother about it. I expected her to laugh, to say I'd let shadows and fog get to me. Instead, her face went pale in a way I'd never seen. She crossed herself and whispered, La Llorona. I'd heard the name before. Every kid in my town had. A story told to scare children into behaving. A woman who had drowned her own children in a river, then drowned herself in grief. condemned to wander the waterways forever, wailing for what she lost. But hearing the name from my grandmother in that hushed, fearful way made the story feel heavier, older, like it wasn't just a story, but something carved into the bones of the land. You must never stop for her, my grandmother said. No matter how real she looks, no matter how she cries, she will drag you down with her into the water, and you will never come back. I didn't tell her how close I had come to stopping. For weeks after, I avoided the river. If I had to drive near it, I kept the windows rolled up tight and the music loud, just to drown out the possibility of whispers in the current. But fear is stubborn. It waits. The more you try to ignore it, the sharper it becomes. One night, driving home late, I found myself on the same stretch of road. I hadn't meant to take it. I hadn't even been thinking. My hands had steered me there, out of habit, like an old route carved into muscle memory. The tires hummed over familiar ground, and the sound of the river grew louder in my ears. The bridge appeared ahead, pale under the moon. My chest tightened. She was there again. This time she stood in the middle of the bridge, directly in my path. I slammed the brakes without meaning to. The car shuddered to a halt yards from her. My headlights washed over her figure. The white dress clung as though freshly soaked. Her hollow eyes glimmered. She raised one arm and pointed directly at me. Her lips moved. The sound slipped into my ears like a whisper from inside my skull. Help me. The words hit me harder than the scream had. They sounded broken, desperate, human. For a moment, against all reason, I thought of opening the door. She wasn't a monster, I told myself. She was a grieving mother, trapped in sorrow. What harm could it do to listen? Then movement below caught my eye. In the water beneath the bridge, shadows shifted. Pale hands broke the surface, small, childlike, reaching upward. The air filled with voices, high-pitched, insistent, overlapping cries of "Mama, Mama." The woman's face twisted. The whisper became a shriek. She lunged forward, and the bridge shook under my tires. I slammed the gas. The car leapt forward, headlights blinding her. She vanished at the instant I should have struck her. In the mirror she stood behind me, arms raised, wailing as though cursing the sky. The children's voices rose in a deafening chorus, then fell silent all at once. By the time I crossed the county line, my hands were shaking so badly I could hardly keep the wheel straight. I told myself I wouldn't drive that road again, but curiosity is another kind of hunger. I started asking around, quietly, carefully. People always went missing near that bridge. A trucker once called dispatch to say a woman in white was waving him down. His rig was found empty the next morning, engine still running, door open. A teenager claimed he'd seen her too. He said she gave him a rideshare request from a dripping phone, water still streaming from the speaker when it rang. The boy vanished a week later. The locals, especially the older ones, never cross after dark. They avoid the river, avoid the bridge. If you press them, they'll tell you the same thing my grandmother did. La Llorona searches. She searches forever, and if she finds you, she never lets go. For months I stayed away. I moved apartments just to be farther from the water. I told myself it was over, but it wasn't. The first time I heard her away from the river, I thought I was dreaming. I woke in the night to the faint rush of water. Not pipes, not appliances. A river, close and insistent, and beneath it, a woman's voice, sobbing just beyond the walls. I told myself it was a nightmare, but the sound came again and again, sometimes louder, sometimes faint, sometimes just a breath of it as I drifted off to sleep. One night I went to the window. The street was dry. The night was still. But if I listened carefully, I could hear footsteps in water, slow, deliberate, pacing, searching. It doesn't matter if I move. It doesn't matter how far I drive. She's not waiting at the bridge anymore. She's waiting for me. And I know someday I'll cross again. Now, on to the next story. The storm didn't take the town in a hurry. It arrived the way old debts do, announced by a change in air, a smell of wet metal, the gulls gone quiet, as if they'd been told a secret. The harbor smoothed itself under a sky that had lost its edges. Every house on the cliff shut a single blind, then another, the way eyes close when they don't want to see the ending. I sat my shift at the volunteer station with the radio tuned low. The lighthouse proper hadn't worked in years. Automation, budgets, but the beacon still spun on calm nights because the town liked the look of it. The real work was below, at the end of the breakwater, where a pole held a LED that blinked red with bureaucratic rhythm. It never failed. It just wasn't enough. Before the first heavy drops, I saw them, 3 pale lanterns hovering low over the water, far outside the mouth of the harbor where no boats should be. Not the sodium lamps of the causeway, not the shrimpers' deck lights. These floated like will-o'-the-wisps held by careful hands. They moved together, then apart, then together again, the way people walk when they are not sure whether to enter a house. I reached for the binoculars, even though the rain had started to stitch the air. Through the blur, I made out the shape of a skiff where the lanterns hung, too small for the swells the storm had already promised, too far out for anyone with sense. A figure at the bow lifted a light and turned, as if looking for a channel that had shifted while they blinked. "Don't," I said to the glass, to the weather, to anyone who might be listening. The radio crackled with the dispatcher's voice, businesslike, half bored. "Heads up, Station 2. Report of lights off Greystone. Anyone on eyes?" "I've got them," I said. "Skiff, lanterns, no call sign. They're not coming in." "Not coming in, how?" "They're not finding us," I said, and wished I had a better word for what the ocean does when it reorders maps. The old men at the station call those lights the drowned. Not because they belong to the dead, though that's always in the corner of the story, but because they come from the shrine that fell into the bay 140 years ago. It sat where our breakwater sits now, a wooden pavilion built on pilings, a place to leave coins and wishes and thin paper charms that fluttered in wind that had learned manners from prayer flags. One storm took it. The pilings cracked, the floor tilted, the lanterns went under and kept burning where the eyes couldn't see. That's how they tell it, without smiling. Sometimes, on nights like this, the lights rise again and ask the living to remember the way in. I put the horn on the roof and sounded a warning. The low note went out across the water and came back wrong, bent by rain and tide. I grabbed the emergency bag because you always grab the bag, and I ran for the breakwater because you always run for the place where rocks look like help. By the time I reached the end, the lanterns had drawn closer, 3 small fires cupped in careful hands, level with the waves but not afraid of them, moving with the tide and against it. I could make out the skiff's hull now, pale plank on pale water, and the person at the bow, a boy in a raincoat that had lost its yellow, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes fixed on the red blink like he could stare it brighter. "Turn back," I shouted, pointless. The wind filed my words until they were too thin to pick up. The lantern nearest me dipped, then lifted, the international language of please. The boy turned in the direction the flame motioned. He didn't see me. He didn't see anything but light. I didn't have a boat. The town keeps the work skiff locked 2 doors down for liability reasons, which is another word for regret. What I had was rope and the old stories about what you do when the drowned borrow the night. You give them what they ask for and make sure it cannot hurt them. You toss them ladles with holes in the bottom so they can bail forever without sinking you. You answer when they count you, but wrong, so they cannot get the number they need to take you with them. You carry salt in your pocket and throw it over your shoulder as if the ocean might be surprised by that memory. The boy raised his lantern high. It was made in the old way, wooden frame, rice paper sides, a wick that did not mind rain. He swung it toward the gap in the breakwater where the old foundation stones still show under low tide. No gap existed now. The storm had topped the rocks with a single long muscle of water. He stepped forward with the easy confidence of someone who has crossed this way 100 times in a summer that is not this one. "Stop," I yelled, and threw the coil. The line arced, fell short. Another wave lifted the skiff and turned it a fraction. The lanterns shifted to match, patient as nurses. A hand appeared at the stern. Another figure, older, shoulders big enough to carry nets and names. He said something to the boy I couldn't hear. The boy shook his head. The older one looked up at the breakwater with eyes that were neither frightened nor angry, just aware, the way you are when you have taken inventory of your luck and found it insufficient. "Take the end," I shouted and threw again, farther into the shape of the wind, praying the rope would decide to be heavy where it needed to be. It landed against the skiff's port side with a slap that sounded like a door closing. The older man caught it in one hand without looking. He didn't tie it. He just held on, like a man is a cleat until he isn't. The lanterns dipped again, once, twice. The boy turned them toward the break in the rocks that wasn't there, and for a second, just one, the water lifted as if rising to the idea of a channel. The skiff slid in. The rope went taut between my hands and the older man's. It hummed. "Let it go," I called, because the humming had a pitch I knew from the vent above my bed on nights when the wind wants to be a song. "Let it go, and follow me, but the drowned don't let you do both. If you drop the connection, the lights move on, patient, polite, expectant. If you hold the connection, they guide you, and their idea of safety is not yours." The boy stepped onto a rock that had no dry on it. The older man's hand tightened on the rope. The skiff slid sideways and did not lift with the wave that should have lifted it. The lantern ceased to need hands. I don't make heroic decisions. I do the next sensible thing badly and with sincerity. I wrapped the line twice around the iron post at the end of the breakwater and leaned my weight into it and prayed I wouldn't get the older man killed by giving him something to fight that wasn't the ocean. "Turn your light," I yelled at the boy, because light is language, and he was listening to the wrong conversation. "Turn it to me." He did, not because I had any authority, but because I sounded like a shoreline, and he had forgotten how to find one. He swung the lantern toward my face, and for a second we saw each other plain. His eyes were not young at all. Mine were tired. Rain made us both strangers. The lantern's flame licked my cheek without burning. It smelled like salt and something older than oils. I lifted my free hand and shaped the air as if it were a knob. I turned the boy's lantern toward the red blink at the end of the pole, and then past it to the left where the channel actually ran tonight, which is not where it ran last week and never where it plans to run tomorrow. It took him a moment to understand that I was asking him not to follow the light to the light, but to aim the light at the way. The older man read it first. Something in his shoulders changed from resisting to remembering. He shifted his weight. He didn't pull. He held. The rope hummed a new note. The skiff found water that wanted it. The three lanterns moved to match, one leading a fraction, one flanking, one hanging back as if to count. The boy held his higher. The older man stepped closer to the center of the boat, feet following memory, not map. Together we slid the skiff along the wet top of the breakwater's logic until the inside water calmed enough to welcome them. When the bow kissed the lee side of the rocks, the older man let the rope fall. The boy's lantern guttered and flared, then burned steady. I dropped to my knees and hauled until the skiff's hull scraped the stones, and the boy stumbled into the small and particular gravity of safety. He looked at me like a person looks at a window after getting out of a locked room. The older man tied nothing, thanked no one. He was the kind of grateful the ocean approves of. Quiet, practical, already attending to the next thing. Behind them, outside the mouth, the three pale lanterns hovered a moment. then drew apart, then sank, slowly, as if reluctant to leave a conversation they had almost finished. The surface closed over them as cleanly as a lid. The red blink resumed its rhythm. The storm decided to take itself more seriously and began. We brought the skiff up the inside of the wall in quick, small pulls, the boy carrying his light like a child carries a cat, possessive, careful, reverent to a degree that does not admit reason. When we reached the inner dock, neighbors gathered in that way, small towns do, all at once and out of nowhere, with blankets and questions. No one asked about the other lights. They knew better. Someone pressed a mug into the boy's hand. Someone else clapped the older man's shoulder and missed the way he flinched. Later, when the radio had finished with its relief and the checklist had been checked twice and the rain decided to become a wall rather than a suggestion, I went back to the end of the breakwater alone. The surface outside boiled with white in patterns only the old men could name. Somewhere under that muscle lay pilings that had once held the shrine, lantern hooks that had once held prayers, paper that had once held names. Somewhere under that, older still, lay the reasons any of us ask the sea to let us cross it, and the sea's slow answers. I tossed a handful of salt into the air because it was in my pocket, and because superstition is a promise you make to everything you can't fix. The wind took it and returned a little to my face, which is the sea's way of saying in you. The next morning, the boy's mother found me at the station with a pie and a letter in bad pen. The pie was necessary, the letter was not. It said nothing about lanterns. It didn't mention the way the rope hummed. It thanked me for being outside when someone was lost. He kept the lamp, she said, when I asked. His grandfather says it's ours. The older man was the boy's grandfather. Then, of course, carrying a skiff through rain is a heritage. He stood at the door while his daughter spoke. He didn't look inside. His hair had a new white in it, the kind storms paint when they need to leave a record. You'll see them again, he said flatly. Not a threat, a weather report, maybe for us, maybe not. I nodded. The pie smelled like cinnamon and apology. My hands ached where the rope had asked questions they answered poorly. Some nights, long after the breakwater dried and the pole blinked and the beacon on the hill spun out of nostalgia, the three pale lanterns return and hang far outside, polite and patient, asking to be followed by anyone who has a reason. I keep rope near the door. I keep salt in my pocket, not because it changes water, it doesn't, but because it changes me slightly, and that seems to be the bargain. If the lights want me, they will know my name the way the fog did. I will choose to stay, then choose again and again until the choice gains weight. If you see old light on new water, aim yours at the way, not the flame. Throw holes to the hands that ask, don't count correctly. And if a lantern rises dripping from a place where wood should not remember fire, treat it like a neighbor and not like a sign. The shrine still burns down there. Some prayers take longer to finish than others. On our side of the surface, we keep an eye on the channel and pretend the red blink is sufficient. On most nights it is. On the others, bring rope. Now, on to the next story. The first time I saw her, she stood at the bend in the road where the guardrail had a dent that matched my car's left fender, not because I had hit it, I never have, but because after a while, you begin to recognize the shapes your life might make if you stopped paying attention. Her dress was white and wrong for the weather. The fog made lace of the headlights, and her hair lay flat against her skull in that soaked way that means the cold has decided the shape of you. I slowed. You always do, even after you promise yourself you won't. She didn't wave. The ones who wave want something you can give. Phones, rides, cigarettes. The ones who don't want something you don't own. I rolled the window down an inch. You okay? I asked, because there are things you say even when you know they are not the right questions. She stepped into the beam of light. Her face was very pale and very composed, the way the dead are in paintings where artists have mercy. There was a water line darkening her dress at the hips, as if she had climbed out of a lake and left the lake behind out of politeness. Her eyes did not meet mine. They fixed on the passenger seat. "Can I sit?" she asked, not looking at me, and the grammar was so ordinary, I said yes before the rest of me could vote. The door opened without my hand. The smell of the river climbed into the car and chose a corner. She sat and buckled herself in with careful fingers. The belt lay wrong across her chest, as if it remembered another shape. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Home," she said. The road took us in. The fog swallowed the world beyond my high beams, leaving me a ribbon of brightness to follow and nothing else. We drove past the stretch where the water runs closest, and the sound of it becomes a second engine. She turned her head fractionally toward it, and then away, as if listening to a story that had been told to her too many times. "Did you come from there?" I asked, and regretted the question as soon as it left me. She folded her hands in her lap. They were not cold. They were the temperature of water that has decided to be a body for a while. "Everyone does," she said. We reached the old stone bridge. The county never tore it down because bridges are superstitions you don't want to test. The new road goes around, the old one crosses. I never choose the old one at night, but the fog pulled my hands left, and the car obeyed. Halfway across, she spoke in a voice you use when you remind someone to take a breath. "Don't stop." I didn't. The fog thickened into a wall, and then into a room, and then into a person. A woman stood in the lane ahead, dress whiter than fog, mouth open in a sound I could not hear, because hearing is not the only way to understand. My passenger reached out and laid her hand lightly on my wrist. The car did not slow. The woman blurred, as if my headlights had learned mercy. We passed through the place where she stood, and the engine did not falter, and the fog behind us closed its mouth. At the far side of the bridge, the passenger exhaled for the first time. It sounded like a tide changing its mind. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not stopping." "Where is home?" I asked. She smiled then. A small, exact thing you could put in your pocket and take out when you needed proof that kindness has weight. "Anywhere away from the water," she said. "For now." The houses returned in cautious clusters. Streetlights remembered themselves. She touched the window with the back of her fingers, as if feeling for a seam. "Here is fine," she said, at a corner with no house. And I pulled over because it's easier than asking for reasons you won't understand. She unbuckled. The seat beside me grew lighter. "Will I see you again?" I asked before I could stop wanting the answer. She looked at the empty passenger seat and not at me. "If you stop," she said, and then the door opened and closed, and nobody stood outside, and the smell of the river gathered itself up and left through the vents. I drove home the long way. I washed my face and did not look into the corners of the mirror. I slept badly and woke with my hands aching from gripping the wheel too long. The next night I took the new road. The fog found me anyway. At the bend with the dent in the rail, she stood exactly where the light likes faces. I rolled my window down an inch, as if I could reduce the size of the question by being careful. "Can I sit?" she asked, eyes fixed on the passenger seat. I nodded. We drove. The old bridge waited. The fog made a door of itself. A woman stood inside the door. My passenger's hand found my wrist without looking. We didn't stop. On the far side, she said thank you, like a child practicing a word her mother taught her. "How long will you ride with me?" I asked. "Until you forget," she said. "Forget what?" "That the road is not a river." We passed the corner where she had vanished the night before. "Here," she said again, and her smile was the same exact shape as yesterday's. She left. I drove on. The smell of the river stayed longer this time, like a friend who has decided to be rude because leaving is hard. On the third night, I told myself I would take the highway. I told myself I would shut my eyes to the bend. and the bridge, and the fog, and the shape of a woman standing where the world narrows. I told myself many things. The car did what it wanted. At the bend, no one stood. I felt relief like thirst. At the bridge, the fog leaned in. A woman waited in the lane, dress a white that contains all the other colors. I gripped the wheel and did not slow because I had learned a rule, and rules save lives until they don't. Then I saw her, not on the bridge, but reflected in my windshield, like a ceiling fan you only notice when it stops. My passenger sat beside me, hand on my wrist, eyes on the road. Only she wasn't there. The seat was empty. The belt lay unused. Her hand weighed my wrist and did not. "Don't stop," she said from nowhere you could name. I didn't. We crossed. On the far side, the word thank you arrived in the car and landed in the seat like a coin. The fog thinned. The houses returned. At the corner with no house, the door opened and closed for no one at all. On the fourth night, the river came to my street. The asphalt smelled of old water. The drains muttered to themselves. I stood at my window and watched the reflection of a white dress move across the glass where the room behind me should be. It didn't look at me. It looked at the passenger seat. I don't take the bridge anymore. I don't take the new road either. Some nights I don't take roads at all. I walk until the city runs out of places to be, and then I stand very still and try to remember the weight of a hand that may have been mine. If you are driving late and the fog makes doors where there should be air, and a woman asks to sit without looking at you, say yes. Keep the window cracked just enough to let manners in. And when the lane ahead narrows into a room with a mouth, don't stop. Not for the first figure, not for the second, not even for the version of you that stands in the road and begs you to open your own door. Some passengers you carry until you forget. Some roads are rivers when you aren't looking. Some nights kindness is the only bridge that holds. And if she asks where home is, say anywhere away from the water. For now, story 6. They called it the Swallowing Lake. Not in brochures, not in any official way. On maps it had a colonial name that sat on it like a borrowed coat. But the locals called it what it did, the way you name a dog after its worst habit. The lake ate, not quickly, not with violence, with patience. A canoe would slip from its tie and drift toward the center, and then not be a canoe anymore by morning. A buoy would slide a foot down its rope each day until the rope had no slack left, and then somehow found more. The dock had teeth marks in it if you went out at dawn and dared to look closely. Little semicircles chewed into the wet wood where the water had lifted itself and tested what the world was made of. We rented the cabin because it was cheap and because grief makes bad bargains. My brother said the quiet would help. I said quiet is a mirror and we're not ready to see ourselves yet. We went anyway because you go toward water when you don't know what else to do. The first night, the lake knocked politely at the shore. The sound was almost words. We ignored it, the way you ignore a neighbor who wants to talk about weather. You can see yourself. In the morning, our footprints from the night before had softened. By noon, they were gone. The beach smoothed into a blank page. My brother said wind. I said of course. On the second night, a shape drifted in from the middle distance. A tree, we thought. Deadfall loosed from someplace upstream. It came closer without coming closer. The lake is good at that. And when it reached the shallow slope where you can still see bottom, it wasn't a tree. It was a door. Red paint flaked from it, in the way old barns peel. No hinges, no handle. Just a door lying flat in the water, as if the lake had decided to sleep like a house. Don't touch it, I said, because some sentences say themselves. My brother laughed, because laughter is one way to keep a thing where you can see it. He waded into his knees. The water did that cold trick where it climbs, and your body pretends to be brave. He put his hand on the edge of the door and pushed. It moved as if pushing were something it had been waiting for. He turned it toward shore. We dragged it up onto the sand together. It was heavier than its size. Doors remember every hand that ever closed them. There was writing on the underside, pencil scrawled over a child's height and an adult's, names, dates, a list of things that get longer when you're not looking. The most recent entry read like a note someone wrote to themselves and forgot on purpose. If you open it while the lake is speaking, you don't come back the same. We leaned it against the cabin wall as if it belonged to us now. It made the place look like it had a history beyond a rental agreement. That night, the lake spoke, not out loud. There are rooms inside you that hear things your ears don't. I woke with the door's red pressed against the back of my eyes and the sound of someone knocking on the underside of water. My brother slept anyway. His body had made its choice. I went to the deck and stood with my hands wrapped in a blanket and watched the lake breathe. The door against the cabin wall cast a thin shadow, as if the moon had drawn it with a hard pencil, and then lifted the pencil carefully so as not to smudge. The knocking continued, not frantic, patient, as if whatever was underneath knew we would open if we decided we were decent. I went down to the sand. The door looked taller at night. I put my ear against the old wood and heard a voice the way you hear your own blood when you lie too long on one side. It said my name in the tone people use when they want to borrow something and intend to give it back. "Go away," I said without much conviction. The door answered by not answering. I don't know how long I stood there. The lake's edge crept an inch up the sand, and then two, and then stopped. Good manners again, as if to say, I won't come farther unless invited. At dawn, my brother came down with 2 mugs and tried to hand me warmth I could not hold. "We're leaving today," he said, and I nodded because that is the shape a promise makes when it isn't sure it can be kept. We carried the door back to the water together. It floated as if it had been relieved of duty. He turned it so the writing faced down, as if to keep the names from getting wet. I watched his fingers let go one at a time, the way people do when they're practicing their exit. The lake accepted the door and took it toward the center with the same speed it takes everything, slow, certain, kind, if you like a certain kind of kindness. We packed. We cleaned as if a stranger were going to judge us. We put the keys where the email said to. I stood on the deck for a last look and saw the lake's middle pucker, as if something had just decided to open its mouth. "Don't look," my brother said. "Don't make it a story." On the drive home, the road unspooled and spooled behind us. At a turnout where you can see the lake from above, if you don't mind the guardrail being a suggestion, I told him to stop. He said no, the way you say no to a child who asks to hold a knife. I said please the way you say please when you already did the thing and are asking permission to remember it that way. We pulled over. The lake lay below, very still and very much pretending. In the center, a square of red floated like a mouth that had learned manners and shut itself. "Is that," my brother began, and then the red tipped, and the lake closed over it without ripple, as if swallowing were the same as never having been hungry. We didn't speak the rest of the drive. At home, the house's familiar corners did that trick where they look new when you return from a place that doesn't have corners. I slept and dreamed the sound of knocking on the underside of something that wasn't the lake anymore. In the morning, my front door had a new scratch low down where your hand goes when you're small. I keep a glass of water by the bed now. I don't drink it. I watch it. Some nights, when the room holds very still, the surface shivers though the air is calm. I tell myself it is trucks on a distant street, a neighbor closing a drawer. Down the hall, my brother runs his shower too long. He sings to cover the knocking. It doesn't work, but it makes a better story. If you go to the swallowing lake, don't bring back souvenirs. Don't write your name on the underside of anything. And if a door floats up to you as if you called it, push it back with both hands and don't read the list. Names are invitations. Lakes collect them. If someone inside the wood asks you to open, ask them this instead. Will you give it back? If they say yes, know that they mean the wrong thing, because lakes don't empty. They learn you. They keep what you were when you stood on their shore and listened too long. And sometimes, at night, the water in your house remembers the shape of a door and knocks until you come to let it in.